The very future of AFC Bournemouth was hanging by a thread, in League 2 starting the season on minus 17 points. In less than a decade, they were in the top half of the Premier League. This is a story of Eddie Howe's Bournemouth, football's ultimate rags to riches story. Bournemouth's history, get ready for a lot of graphs and a lot of name changes. The 1890s are here and football comes to Bournemouth, and in particular Boscombe, which lies on the eastern part of the tracks apparently. Boscombe St John's Institute Football Club becomes a more simpler Boscombe Football Club. Everlasting foundations of the modern day club were set in the early 1900s as Boscombe FC moved into senior amateur football and were underwritten by a certain Mr J.E. Cooper Dean. Thanks to his generous money, the club occupied some wasteland on Kings Park, quickly renamed to Dean Court. Guess where they got the inspiration for that name, and they still play there today. Of course, all the names have since been changed. The new ground births the new moniker of the Cherries, whether it's because of the cherry orchards nearby Dean Court or because they played in cherry red, who knew? It's probably the shirts though. And then relatively nothing. War hits, Boscombe are still playing amateur football, and when football resumes, it is only the grand 1920 expansion of the English league system that shuffles the deck. Now, Boscombe was simply entering the Southern League in 1920 before finishing second in what was now a league full of professional sides' second teams. Thanks to Stalybridge Celtic's resignation from the 3rd Division North in the summer of 1923, Boscombe were elected to the Football League. It was a fresh start, and given that it's Boscombe, they needed a fresh name change, so became re-encumbered by the lengthy Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic, which I'm just going to call Bournemouth for brevity's sake, albeit they wouldn't go by their modern AFC Bournemouth name until 1971. Now they're in the Football League, the possibilities were endless. Instead, Bournemouth chose to stay put. Seriously, no promotions, no relegations, no threats of extinction. Nothing. Currently, the longest time spent by any club in a single division in the Football League is Newport County's 13-year stretch in League 2. In the 3rd tier right now, Burton Albion have been the most unimaginative, standing still for 8 seasons. That is just the blink of an eye for Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic. Being that the 3rd division was regionalised, only one team from each league could go up, making it incredibly hard to force promotion. The Cherries recorded a handful of top 10 finishes before war postponed the sport once again. Upon its resumption, the club would go as close as ever to promotion, finishing second to QPR in the 1947-48 campaign. After a regression to 3rd the year after, mid-table returned to be the norm for the 1950s and the 1960s. The closest anything got to any real change was the creation of a 4th division, which meant anybody in the bottom half of the 1957-58 season of both 3rd divisions would go down. Bournemouth and Boscombe naturally did enough to survive. Then finally, with the 1970s came a divisional change. Not including war, that amounted to 40 seasons of professional football in the same division. Outside of the top flight, this remains, and probably will do for eternity, an English record. Naturally, the Cherries popped right back up to the 3rd division at the first time of asking. Blessing the 3rd division again, only now armed with momentum, the time was deemed right to become AFC Bournemouth, a desperate move so they'd at least be top of the league before each season started. The red and black stripes were introduced, and now that Bournemouth realised they could actually move divisions, they actually did it quite routinely, but most importantly of all, sensibly. In this period of relative vertigo, Bournemouth came out of their shell. There was the 9 goals scored by Ted McDougall in an FA Cup tie against Margate in 1971. There was the appointment of Harry Redknapp in 1983. The first of which a nice little footnote, of course, the second of which the real beginning of the modern Bournemouth.
Sully looking to bend the corner in once more, and Bailey in trouble. A goal! He trying to keep the pressure on. Morgan's jump. Thompson! It's 2! 2 goals inside 3 minutes!
This is often seen as Game Zero and a well-worn milestone on what would become Bournemouth under Harry Redknapp. Under the new manager, the club would gain access to the 2nd tier for the very first time in 1987, in the process winning their first title before being steered into the highest finish of 12 2 years later. But a season on, everything changed. Any mention of this fixture in the local area probably wouldn't prompt anything about Bournemouth's game on the pitch, or even the fact that it confirmed their relegation. No, this was the day Leeds United came to town and ransacked Bournemouth. When Harry Redknapp couldn't return the Cherries to the second tier and was offered the assistant manager's post at West Ham in 1993, the wheels were set in motion for an almighty rollercoaster ride. Despite promotion, quickly everything looked lost. 5 years later, the club announced it was going into administration. Financial ruin was quickly followed by sporting disaster as the Football League had to hand out a 10-point deduction. It says a lot that a former Leeds United chairman in Gerald Krasner was then asked to pick up the pieces, as he had attempted to at Elland Road 3 years prior. He was taken over from a supporters' trust that had long been struggling to keep the club afloat. Debts had spiralled out of control to £4 million. On the pitch from the final 7 games, Bournemouth gained 19 points. They took things to the final day after a win over relegation rivals Crewe, only to slip up on the final day at Carlisle. They were back in League 2, but it was only the start of their problems. There was the real fear that Bournemouth wouldn't be able to fulfil any of their League 2 fixtures, as Luton Town fell straight through the trap door to the conference with a 30-point deduction. Bournemouth might have evaporated out of existence entirely. Jeff Mostyn continued to stave off the threat of liquidation by pumping money into the club. He couldn't do it all on his own. As such, he had to sack the club's entire coaching staff. Kevin Bond went off to join former Cherries alum Harry Redknapp at Spurs. Meanwhile, a first-team coach by the name of Eddie Howe was repurposed at the club's centre of excellence. Jimmy Quinn was put in charge, but he wouldn't be able to see out the year known as 2008. Bournemouth have a dislocated kneecap to thank for why they are where they are today. It was the wandering knee of Eddie Howe that cost him his professional playing career, aged 29, and it almost immediately landed him one of the craziest jobs any manager has ever had to undertake in football. The retirement of Eddie Howe was the best thing to have ever happened to him. The former Portsmouth and Bournemouth player got his promotion to the big job in January 2009 after Jimmy Quinn's sacking at Dean Court. Bournemouth were busy orbiting a black hole called non-league football, financial oblivion, and the probable spaghettification of liquidation that followed. The Cherries had been docked 17 points and only returned to parity by December against Luton Town. 4 losses turned into only 2 defeats from 13 as Howe righted the ship, and the club wound up 11 points clear of the drop and safe by some margin. Had they not had points docked, Bournemouth would have just finished outside the playoff spots. Eddie Howe's first full season delivered on that promise, as Brett Pittman banged in almost 30 goals as the Cherries were plucked from their third-tier tree and were placed into the punnet of League One. Then, Eddie Howe and his quick handshaking, grandstanding, cue-pushing, grab-all-the-limelight perpetual assistant Jason Tindall left for the Burnley job, just another bump in the Bournemouth road. At the time, Bournemouth were attempting to crash into the Championship at the first time of asking. His successor, Lee Bradbury, in the meantime, sunk them into the playoffs. There was hope, though, for Bournemouth. They could be thankful that Eddie Howe's managerial career had stalled at Turf Moor. After the passing of his mother, he felt compelled to return home, and to his footballing home too, in October 2012. The Cherries had popped into 11th place in the 2011-12 campaign, and when Howe rejoined, they were in the midst of just one win from their first 11 and were more set on a return to League 2 than a promotion to the Championship. In the team now, Harry Artu had played under Howe in his first spell, as well as Simon Francis, Steve Cook, Tommy Elphick, Charlie Daniels, Ryan Fraser and Lewis Grabban, whom Howe would inherit. A solid call.
From the edge of the box seemed to be turned in by Tommy Elphick for a second win. The United midfielder claimed a couple in the earlier league fixture.
The impact of Eddie Howe was felt immediately. An initial 21 games without defeat was followed by 8 wins from a final 9, which were the perfect ingredients for promotion to the Championship.
Through for Ranty! He's done it!
Whilst there, Bournemouth stabilised themselves into 10th place, i.e. the club's highest ever finish in English football. The only ever time they got close was in the 80-89 campaign under Harry Redknapp. The season began under 1 win, 1 defeat regime, going down heavily at Vicarage Road and at the Gall Farm Stadium before the bottom completely fell out of it before Christmas. 5 days before the festivities, the revival started with a 2-1 win at Hillsborough. Together with long and winding winning runs in the warmer months of March and April, Bournemouth were able to call themselves a top-half second-tier side for the first time. That, though, couldn't have prepared any cherry for the wild scenes of the 2014-15 season.
To all but seal the points for Bournemouth.
The season began with the same mid-table inconsistencies that were practically dreamland to the average Bournemouth fan who barely knew second-tier football. Little did they know that their 2-0 defeat up at Pride Park to end September would be the club's last in 2014. Signing off with a 2-0 victory at the Den on December the 28th, Bournemouth entered 2015 top of the table. The omens were there. The last time a leader of this division hadn't gone up was Ipswich Town 10 years prior. In fact, those Tractor Boys had been the second tier's only New Year leader to fail to go up since 1985. But for a wee February wobble, the Cherries were perfect. They ended the campaign 13 unbeaten and became champions amidst the more experienced names of Watford, Norwich and Middlesbrough.
Westward to take. Gestet! League win coming in spectacular fashion. 4-3 winners over West Ham.
We're told that to succeed in the Premier League you must adapt or die. From Barnsley 98 to Blackpool 2011, they all failed to heed those warnings, played football as they did in the Football League and were quickly punished. Howe's Bournemouth, however, endured the Premier League despite playing the exciting attacking football they were built on throughout their rise through the Football League.
La respinta è corta e poi il colpo di testa di...
The season quickly became a far cry from the successive 5-1 pastings they received off Man City and Spurs in October. In the drop zone with Christmas looming, Chelsea and Man United choked on the Cherries in the same week. This team were going to be just fine. Despite 16th place and only 5 points off the drop come the end of the season, Bournemouth were comfortable. They tailed off significantly at the end of what had been an energy-sapping season. They'd just proven they weren't here to make up the numbers, but they'd have to do so all over again the following campaign.
Good ball too, chance here, and the Bovey missed it, plays it behind it.
Howe remained sensible in the transfer market, only spending close to £30 million because the club had recouped almost 20. In came more exciting signings in Lewis Cook, Jordan Ibe and Nathan Ake, all young and all built for the future, while shipping out names like Sylvain Distin and Matt Ritchie. The future looked bright, save from sticking 3+ goals in home games against Liverpool and Arsenal. Bournemouth acquired 4 more points than the prior season. In what was a Premier League table distorted by the Big Six's omniscience, Bournemouth's 46 points was somehow enough for 9th place. Now, of course, everything outside of the bottom 3 was still fantasy land for Bournemouth fans, but they had just recorded the top half finish for the first time ever. They could even claim they had defeated the champions of England in league competition for the first time ever as well. Leicester, who were definitely hungover following their title binge, came to the Vitality in December, only to be beaten by a Mark Pugh goal. That summer, for the first time in Eddie Howe's managerial career, he was allowed to let loose in the market. This meant shoring up Nathan Ake's contract on a permanent £20 million deal, with Asmir Begovic joining him in goal for half of that. Jermaine Defoe added experience on a free from the relegated Sunderland, whilst no key names were lost. Relatively speaking, we were still talking small potatoes here, but we should know by now that Bournemouth would continue to punch above their weight.
They'll be looking for plenty of movement. The two things come together. Inside the penalty area, Umar Nias!
Or would they? Entering November, the Cherries appear to be circling the drain. Of course, the fixture list did a lot of the heavy lifting in this regard, as Howe's side had welcomed both Manchester City and the reigning champions Chelsea to the south coast, whilst also visiting Goodison, the Emirates and Wembley in the former Spurs. When the fixture smoothed out a little, Bournemouth could enjoy themselves, thrashing a team with even less Premier League experience than themselves in Huddersfield Town 4-0. Sadly, thanks to a shockingly mean-spirited fixture computer, the Cherries were handed the trio of Man United, Liverpool and Man City all before Christmas, ensuring that Eddie Howe would spend the festivities in the drop zone. Then, the revival began.
It's Callum Wilson, it's laid off the right!
Get another shot away here, put in by Ake.
Everton, Arsenal and Chelsea were all beaten before February as Bournemouth returned to what was quickly becoming the home of mid-table in the Premier League. It was a record that said 5 defeats from the second half of a season. By the standard of any non-Big Six team, that was incredible. It meant that Eddie Howe's team were only goal difference away from the top half yet again. It was quickly becoming normal, as were, relatively, huge fees in the transfer market. David Brooks, Jefferson Lerma and Diego Rico all entered through the door for close to £30 million during the summer. Meanwhile, in January, Howe added Dominic Solanke and Chris Mepham for a similar kind of money. And by the time the window had opened, there was even talk of Europe coming to the south coast, and it wasn't to fucking Brighton either.
Fraser to the edge of the box, right footed from Ryan Fraser! Wilson teases one in, King's there, across the face of goal!
The only surprise was that Bournemouth hadn't been able to take a major scalp from the first half of the season, even if they had run teams like Chelsea, Man United, Arsenal and Man City all close, albeit in defeats. No, these days, Howe's team knew their place. They were a mid-table team, and they had become capable of taking routine results at places like West Ham, Watford and Fulham, whilst exerting their dominance over teams such as Leicester, Palace and Brighton at home. Finally, in late January, the run of big shocks at the Vitality ended in explosive fashion.
Lovely little ball into Brooks, pulls it back for Joshua King! Onside, a chance to put the Cherries too clear! Brooks! Stanislas is stuck in, Stanislas the King! Watford Buisson, in comes the call, the header is there!
Sadly though, this season would be almost the inverse to the prior campaign, as for once, Bournemouth ended the season worse off than they began it this time, only winning 5 in the second half of the campaign. Still, it was another solid tally of 45 points, which, in these days, constituted a safe enough place in mid-table. Like their previous campaigns in the top flight, Bournemouth had been leaky at the back there, 70 goals dwarfing their previously relatively high returns defensively. But in the same token, Howe's side had achieved their best scoring return, netting 56 goals, something which has only been broken by the Cherries in the previous 2024-25 campaign. It was another season that was quickly becoming water off a duck's arsehole. Typically, Eddie Howe didn't panic in the transfer market, selling Tyrone Mings and bringing in defensive names in Lloyd Kelly and Jack Stacey for less than the fee gained for Mings. Also added were Philip Billing, Arnaud Danjuma and Harry Wilson, 3 more big young talent.
Solanke, and an opening for a second, and they're taking it. Time to bring it down. Brilliantly taken.
And with their latest win at home to a footballing giant, this time known as Manchester United, Bournemouth had climbed into a European spot. Even though they would go on to lose their next 5 matches, it appeared to be quickly reversed by another famous win over Chelsea, this time at Stamford Bridge on December the 14th. The Cherries were mid-table just like they always were, and whilst New Year was rough, shipping 7 without reply against West Ham and Watford to begin 2020, it wasn't anything that Bournemouth hadn't gone through before. But then, something that we hadn't gone through before.
Good afternoon and welcome to Sky Sports News. As the Premier League, Football League and Women's Super League is suspended until April the 3rd due to coronavirus.
Crossed in towards Smith, and a goal!
Portsmouth had won the league, Southampton won a trophy at Wembley, Bournemouth, well, forget about them. The South Coast was packed with footballing heritage. Finally, as the 70s appeared, finally, Brighton got it. It was November 1897 when football finally rocked up to Brighton. They were called Brighton United and they wouldn't make it to the 20th century. In their place came Brighton and Hove Rangers. They barely crept up the line of the 20th century, mysteriously going out of business, probably something to do with the fact that they were professional in a world of amateurism. June 1901, Seven Stars Public House, Brighton and Hove Albion are formed. It'd prove third time lucky for the town. Within a year, they'd be offered the chance to ground share with Hove FC, and so Brighton and the Goldstone were entwined. Finally, let's talk about the actual football. 1910 it was when Albion claimed the Southern League title, and as such, they qualified for the Charity Shield, taking on the winners of the Football League, the indomitable Aston Villa. Charlie Webb, the hero, at Stamford Bridge in front of a bumper, 13,000. Now was the time to strike whilst the iron was hot. Then some geezer called Archduke Franz Ferdinand got shot in Sarajevo and it called on a world war. When football resumed, Brighton got themselves in with the Football League thanks to the expansion. Grand new horizons? Well, if skulking about in the 3rd Division South for the entirety of the interwar period is your idea of fun, good luck to you. And sure, there were big occasions meeting the teams of their day in Newcastle United, Everton and Huddersfield Town in the Cup, but perhaps the bigger indicator of their settlement into the Football League was their 99-year lease over the Goldstone in 1926, and would you look at that? That's up for renewal this year. After the war, Don Welsh was parachuted into the manager's job. He was responsible for the heaviest spending in club history, and if anything, the club went backwards. They were limping towards another mid-table finish when the previous year's cup finalist Liverpool picked up the blower and invited him to become the manager. Talk about failing upwards. Billy Lane was the next man in the pipeline, delivering attacking football to the Goldstone and 2 silver medals in the 3rd Division South. The problem now was shattering that prohibitive glass ceiling that demanded that only the champions gain access to the nationalised 2nd Division. Finally, after smashing the 60-point barrier for the 3rd time in 5 seasons, Brighton were ironically rewarded with promotion after a comparatively poorer record. Promotion was secured on the final day of April '58 with a 6-0 pumping of Watford. The club was peacocking out into the national game. The Goldstone received a renovation and then, well, Albion's first game in the 2nd tier was the dictionary definition of a baptism of fire, Brian Clough scoring 5 goals in a 9-0 triumph for Middlesbrough. After 3 mid-table seasons in the 2nd tier, Lane handed the club back, having bestowed what was then still the town of Brighton the best football they had ever seen. It was no surprise that once their talisman left, the club fell through the trapdoor of English football. By 1963, it was an official languishing in the 4th Division. New manager George Curtis tried everything, this newfangled 4-2-4 that everyone was gassing on about. Hey, if Brazil could do it, why can't Brighton? And they entrusted in the youth. In the end, it came unstuck. He was replaced by Archie Macaulay as the club barrelled towards the basement of English football. A combination of incentivised wage structures and the acquisition of Bobby Smith helped the club immeasurably. The resultant 1964-65 campaign was a whitewash over the 4th tier, an immediate promotion back to the 3rd, secured with a late April triumph of the mighty Darlington. What they found waiting for them in the 3rd tier was strife similar to their interwar days, going nowhere, finances in the toilet, and after Archie Macaulay resigned in October 1968, the club ditched its reserve team to cut costs. That's how bad things would get. So much for the swinging 60s. When they got a manager in Fred Goodwin that they liked, he was poached by Birmingham City, so it appeared the 70s would be as torrential as the 60s had been. Off the back of the Napiers, Kit and John, not related, the foundations of the 72 promotion team was built, as well as Brian Powney, the club's record goalkeeping appearance maker. The attacking emphasis that Pat Soward placed on the club for that promotion season was ultimately their undoing and signalled their immediate return to the 3rd tier after a loss at QPR. The next appointment was key, and in Mike Bamber, Brighton had a more ambitious name on the board. His first managerial appointment, Brian Clough. Now, don't get it twisted, this is the point in the story where Brighton go from strength to strength, but it was not because of Clough, it's because of the fella sat right alongside him. Yes, this is the Peter Taylor main character story arc. Given his track record, a 5-year contract with Clough, it was never going to mean 5 years, was it? When he was asked back up north by Leeds United after a fairly miserable season of bottom half third tier stuff and a cup defeat to a team called Walton and Hersham, he jumped at the chance. Taylor less so, whilst he got a bit too hard on his belief that Brighton would win the title in the 74-75 campaign, he did introduce the club to Peter Ward from Burton Albion for just $4,000. He'll become important soon. And after going closer to promotion in the subsequent season, Taylor resigned, having failed his mission objective. It would be no surprise that he'd reunite with Clough at Nottingham Forest to create a footballing dynasty. His parting gift for the Goldstone would be defenders Graham Cross and Chris Catlin, as well as Port Vale's Brian Horton, and more indirectly, the club's next manager. Former Fulham and Spurs man Alan Mullery was chosen for the Goldstone post, and in his first few weeks as a football manager, he'd coaxed 7 goals out of his front line on 2 separate occasions. By the end of 1976, Brighton stood proud at Condensed Field as one of the 3 teams best placed for promotion. The contenders ran down to 8th place Crystal Palace, who we've snipped out of this table for a bit of a laugh, but it was Palace who cut Brighton from the FA Cup after a marathon 3 games in the first round. In said tie, the referee ordered a scored Brighton penalty to be retaken. It was then missed, Mullery went bananas, Venables disagreed from the other dugout, and so a famous tenuous rivalry was born. Also, according to Paul Camillin and Stuart Weir's great history on Brighton, the birth of the Seagulls moniker was in response to Palace's incessant chanting about Eagles, and it kinda rhymes, so there we go. And this rivalry only intensifies with a loss at Palace in mid-March, which leaves Brighton there to be shot at in 3rd place, and Palace one of the key frontrunners to steal their spot. Across 5 games, Brighton had failed to beat their newfound rivals. But whilst they'd been barred from the FA Cup, they went on a League Cup run like no other. They dragged Ipswich Town back to the Goldstone in the 2nd round, went up to the Hawthorns and stunned West Brom in the 3rd, and even grabbed a replay out of Derby County. Unfortunately, the marathon was ended at the 4th round stage by the Rams at the baseball ground. Thankfully for them tricky goals, they'd cobbled together enough points to have them within touching distance of a 2nd division return. A win at home to Wednesday on a Tuesday night plus favours from elsewhere would have them up. Peter Ward, Brian Hart and Steve Piper with the goals in a 3-2 win which, combined with Rotherham's shock defeat at home to bottom feeders Reading, signalled promotion. Alan Mullery declared, "From now on we are going places." Sadly, Crystal Palace would chase them up into the 2nd tier, sneaking into that 3rd spot. Peter Ward wound up on 36 goals, which crept him past Hugh Valance's previously held scoring record for a season. Now, the trip was to keep going. A dip into the transfer market that summer was headlined by the quirky sum of £111,111 spent on Preston defender Mark Lawrenson. Outside of attempting to stuff their calendar full of drawn league games, Brighton made a decent start to life in the 2nd tier. Their win at Sunderland to begin October making them the top dogs of the division and, alongside Spurs, the only undefeated team left in the league. Leaner times followed, but at the halfway point on New Year's Day, they were still very much placed within the frontrunners. Not shy about spending a few bob, Mullery went big to pry Teddy Maybank away from Fulham at an eye-watering £238,000, which doubled the club's previous transfer record. This only allowed thanks to rampant cash raising from Mike Bamber's property development deals. Maybank would more than make up for Peter Ward's uncharacteristic drought in front of goal. The second half of the campaign was much improved upon, but out of the 6 games in which they dropped points in, you have to say only the draw at Bolton was an acceptable result. Defeats at Cardiff and Sheffield were needless, as were the drop points in Hull and Oldham, not to mention the extension of their winless run against Palace. Still, Brighton clicked into gear in the final straight, defeating Spurs at home before Malcolm Poskett's hat-trick at Bristol Rovers forced their promotion rivals' hands. Another sturdy victory, this time at home to Charlton, took things to the final day. The Seagulls needed to beat the Seasiders and hope that Southampton or Spurs could claim a win in the 2nd versus 3rd clash above them.
Now, Peter Ward on the break. What can he make of this? He's only got Sotheby to beat. Peter Ward going on, and he's made it! The kick, Horton versus Hesford. And he scores! Brian Horton makes it 2-0.
Now just allow me for 1 second to don the tinfoil hat and declare I don't think that Southampton or Spurs tried all that much to get a win, really. The pair truced a 0-0 out of proceedings, ensuring that both would be insulated from Brighton's win. It stunk then, it stinks now, but Brighton had shown more than enough to say they would challenge again the following season.
And the glorious first goal as Paul Clark scores with a tremendous shot, giving Jeff Wood no chance at all. Well, Brighton, his cross is turned into his own goal by Peter Shaw to make it 2-0 to Brighton.
Took a long time for Brighton to shake the inconsistencies from the season. Where they could go to Turf Moor and dump their opponents out of the League Cup in October, they returned there less than 3 weeks later and were defeated. That, alongside continuing their winless streak against Palace, it didn't help. In fact, it took elimination from the League Cup at what was the reigning champions of England and soon-to-be champions of Europe, Nottingham Forest, in the closest Brighton had ever gotten to Wembley for them to snap out of their funk. Upon their December ejection from the tertiary domestic competition, Brighton was 7th place, but only 5 points off the pace set by Crystal Palace. Things were so bad that Terry Maybank asked to be dropped for the Boxing Day visit of Cardiff City. Mullery refused, Maybank netted a hat-trick, and the rest was history. By the start of 79, the Seagulls landed into the promotion spots, picking up a punishing pace that would stay the course. Just 2 defeats were suffered at Preston in February and at Cardiff again in April, but a slew of drawn games, including at home to Palace yet again, meant that the second division promotion race was to go down to the wire. In fact, Brighton only held their fate in their own hands in approach to the final day, thanks to the trio of Sunderland, Stoke and West Ham all dropping points as Brighton won at home to Blackburn in their penultimate match. 1 point split the top 4 teams, which was interesting in of itself. Then you had to factor in Palace's game in hand, and back there in 5th, West Ham weren't yet out of it either. Whilst Brighton travelled up to Newcastle, they were a shell of their former selves and had nothing to play for.
A lot of Brighton players pushed forward. Oh, it's a beautiful goal! Beautiful close control by Ward, and it's a goal! Straight under the body, up to Ward. Oh, it's almost the third, it is the third, and there's no doubt about that one.
Without player of the season, Mark Lawrenson, didn't matter. Brighton won 3-1, they'd go up, and the only blemish to the campaign was Palace's following them, not only being promoted but going up as champions. Perhaps that was the best thing, it fluffed the little London Eagles' feathers out a bit more. It should have been the start of something special. Instead, Peter Ward was busy handing in a transfer request. Papering over the cracks was his belated agreement to a new deal, whilst Mullery was brokering other deals for John Gregory and Steve Foster. The idea was a stronger spine.
Paddon to Reeves, and there's some nice play coming in here from Norwich in these early stages, and that's a lovely chip, and it's there! Again, the big man at the back coming up for Southampton. Watson!
And whilst to a certain extent this is some of the only available footage, the Seagulls did begin the campaign poorly, with only 2 wins from their first 14 games, which had them propping up the division. Arsenal royally dismantled them in both cup competitions, but by the time they saw to their FA Cup elimination, Brighton had gotten themselves on the straight and narrow. They'd even defeated Crystal Palace at the 1000th time of asking, so by the time the 80s was welcomed, Brighton were out of the drop zone. The club even explored a move for West German international Rainer Bonhoff, although obviously that never materialised. Ultimately, safety was secured with ample breathing room, a 2-1 win over Middlesbrough in mid-April. It was a day that ended in some sense of dismay as the South Stand caught fire. Thankfully though, the ground had long been evacuated, and for on-pitch matters, Brighton were grateful that it was the one true piece of drama in the final straight. That wouldn't be the case for long though. It had become apparent that the club could no longer hold on to Peter Ward, whose signature demanded a 400 grand fee from the reigning champions of Europe, Nottingham Forest. Naturally, Brighton were quick on the draw, bringing in Andy Ritchie for a similar amount, whilst Ray Clark, Peter O'Sullivan and Andy Rawlins all departed, whilst Man City's Michael Robinson and Rangers' Gordon Smith were acquired. A bit of a sea change.
Defence, Tommy Hutchison over the ball, the 2-man Brighton ball. And Stewart again! My goodness!
Robin to Crooks. Little burst through from Ardiles. Here's a chance. Ozzy Ardiles. And he's made it.
That goes Royal and Fashanu. Oh, it comes to Maguire.
The start of the campaign had followed a similar trend, a slow start all forgiven by a Christmas run of victories that had them above water by the advent of '81. Those quick-fire results, however, would prove to be the outlier, not even a good old-fashioned cup run, as a 2-0 FA Cup third-round lead at Old Trafford was squandered and the replay lost at home. In fact, after a loss at Middlesbrough on April the 11th, Brighton's plight had become desperate. No longer was fate in their own hands. OK, things weren't as drastic as they were at Sellers Park, but still, Brighton needed an uptick in form, and what better place to go then than Sellers Park itself.
Gary Williams floating a good cross in there. Price has got to get up to it, but it was Gregory, and in the end it was Smith. Smith plays it in for Robinson across the goal there. No doubt about that one. Gregory with the cross for them. And a flying header there.
3 more wins followed, and so just about it was a second season of consolidation. All should have been well. Then the club lost the experience in the shape of Brian Horton. But the kicker is the sale of Mark Lawrenson for $900,000, not to Manchester United as Alan Mullery had agreed to, but to Liverpool. It marked the end of the line of the manager at the Goldstone. But Mike Bailey was employed to ensure that it wasn't the end of the line for Brighton in the top flight of English football. After a boardroom spat between Bamber and Mullery, the Charlton manager who had just led them to third-tier promotion was now in the Brighton hot seat. It wasn't just the manager in the revolving door, there was Jimmy Case and Tony Grealish coming in, as well as the Arsenal duo of Sammy Nelson and Steve Gattin. John Gregory added himself to the long list of departures too, as Bailey named Steve Foster as the club's new captain, and well, didn't go at all badly whatsoever.
Driven in hard and the flick header from Dalglish, and it's in! So Kennedy now with a chance to put it into Dalglish, goes for the return. This is Kennedy. Oh, a terrible! Oh, what a mistake! People forward now, everyone in the Liverpool half. Claimed it was over the line, and it's been given. And that's where he loves to be, down that left-hand touchline. He puts it in right foot. McDermott's got time. Oh, and it took on the overlap. Picks it up. He's got lots of space here if they can knock it back. Robinson's calling for it. What a great header! What a lot of goals. 4-1 for the last home game against Manchester City, and we've got 5 again so far. Foster, Shanks.
Now that game was hardly the one to show you to make the following point, but I felt I needed to show at least some footage. My point being, the football was boring. Oh yeah, 3-3 draw against the perennial champions of England and the world, boring. Okay, let's analyse Brighton's place in the table entering December. 11th with just 3 defeats from 16 matches. They'd never had a start like that. Then you look at the draws column and then you see 9 drawn. Then you look at the Goldstone ground on that footage that I just showed you and only 20,000 people were showing up. Mickey Thomas was signed from Everton in November to give the club a little pep in their step. Didn't particularly work, and by the end of the season, when losses became more prevalent, Brighton could be glad they were increasingly able to turn some of those draws into wins. Not that there's much evidence knocking about for these days about those triumphant afternoons against the royalty of the First Division, Everton, Leeds, Liverpool, Arsenal, all slain in the second half of the season, which saw less results, but the quality of those results increasing when they were able to achieve them. All in all, 13th place. So far, the club's best performance yet. Again, all was not well. The wage bill had cracked $1 million. That's annual wage bill. It was the 80s. And the 22,000 people needed inside the Goldstone to break even wasn't even nearly being acquired. And you had the upcoming removal of shared gate receipts. Brighton were circling the drain and they didn't even know it yet.
Sammy McElroy. Mistake. And the goal by Drummond of Kevin Sheedy for the first goal of the afternoon.
For power. McDonald now. Reeves with the flick. Oh, yes! Kevin.
After the club's 6th win in their 18th fixture at home to Norwich, Mike Bailey was sacked and the House of Cards fell, board members resigning en masse. For a nascent club in the top flight that weren't even in the relegation zone in December, it appeared a bizarre decision. Bailey's defence-first mindset was removed, and in its place, Jimmy Mellier, to bring attacking football back to the Goldstone. From a club treading water, Brighton wouldn't win a league game until March, plunging themselves into the drop zone. The only thing that stated that Brighton could survive was their win over fellow strugglers Swansea, which kept them only goal difference away from usurping their Welsh counterparts. Then Brighton repeated that victorious feat only twice more throughout the season, first against Spurs to begin April and then at home to Coventry later on in the month. A 5-point deficit with 4 to play was going to be tough to overhaul. Just one more point was gained as Brighton returned to the second tier, which brings us on to the actual headline of this video really, the FA Cup run of '83. Even though Newcastle United was saddled with the second tier, their contrasting momentum gave Brighton no chance of prevailing apparently, particularly when they were sent up to the northeast for a bitterly cold replay. Peter Ward's goal combined with 2 disallowed Newcastle strikes earned Brighton their first chunk of luck for months. Next was Manchester City, the team that would eventually confirm their relegation. They were humbled 4-0 quite comprehensively, but when the 5th round draw was made, it was clear Brighton would be finally put out of their misery and forced to focus on their relegation battle. No opposition had won at Anfield for a year, not since Brighton funnily enough. Here they were again, upsetting the odds. A touch of the returning Jimmy Case, a missed Phil Neal penalty and Mark Lawrence's header being thwarted on the line, which sent the Seagulls flapping into the quarter-final. It was their first ever quarter-final in the grand old competition, an opportunity that they weren't about to pass up when the experienced Jimmy Case netted the only goal of the game against Norwich. The footballing gods shone on Brighton for the semi-final draw, handing them one of 2 second-tier outfits in Sheffield Wednesday or Burnley at Highbury, whilst the 2 Goliaths in Manchester United and Arsenal met at Villa Park. 2 late winners, one from Norman Whiteside and one from Michael Robinson, confirmed our finalists. Brighton in their first football final of any description against Manchester United, 4-time winners of the competition who had lost 2 of their last 3 finals within the previous decade. What's more, Brighton would miss their captain Steve Foster thanks to a yellow card suspension when he was booked for dissent against Notts County.
Howlett now. Crossed in towards Smith. And a goal! Brighton have... And it came back off Jimmy Case for Dutch Spearing. Crossed in once more, Whiteside. And Stapleton! A tremendous break through the middle for Wilkins. Oh, a brilliant goal by Ray Wilkins. Here's Grealish. Will he try a shot? He's thrown there for Stevens. 2-2.
Told you.
Moran after him and Robinson still in control. Play for Smith and saved by Bailey. My word, what a remarkable finish.
Smith must score, the famous commentary went, and yet he didn't, letting Manchester United off the hook. The pair would reconvene 5 days later and, well, it just didn't have the same ring to it in all honesty.
And low in for Davis, who got a good position. Robson! That's the goal that Manchester United turned it in for Whiteside. Attention to the hand and elbow there of Norman Whiteside. Muren takes the kick. And the header by Robson finds Stapleton. McQueen made a touch, and it's been followed. But he scores with his left foot and makes it 4-0.
The Jockstein years had ended. From 9 in a row and the quadruple to not even qualifying for Europe Now it was the job of his most loyal servant, Billy McNeill, to pick up the pieces and keep Celtic successful.
Stevens in trouble, there's Joe Miller!
Jock Stein had transformed Celtic from perennial failures to the best team in the world, the only team to have won the quadruple, the first British team to have won the European Cup, and the first Scottish team to have won 9 in a row. Since then, the Hoops have been under the weight of 2 trebles won by the team across town, Celtic slumping to 5th place in 1978. It was clear that Stein's time in the dugout was over, hardly helped by the season he had to take off after a car accident in July 1975. Celtic were no longer a club that could hold on to their star players. In the last years of Stein, the club had lost Lou Macari to Man United, David Hay to Chelsea, and finally Kenny Dalglish to Liverpool. The Quality Street kids had been exhausted, with only Danny McGrain still playing for the club. Meanwhile, Billy McNeill's 1975 retirement was still leaving a huge hole. McNeill finally returned to Parkhead on November the 19th, 1977, but as Aberdeen manager, as his team were only just edged out 15 minutes from time, Celtic claiming the points in a 3-2 victory. It was McNeill who had been touted multiple times by Stein himself throughout the campaign. After all, they had got to within 2 points of champions Rangers, while Celtic languished in 5th, closer in points to the drop than Aberdeen. McNeill inherited a club that was not entered into European competition thanks to a final day loss against St Mirren. It was the first time since '62 they wouldn't be gracing the continent. The 78-79 season saw both of the old firm graced with club legends turned managers, as John Greig occupied the Ibrox dugout. The tone was set when Celtic earned first blood at Parkhead.
Great strength. Edmondson's in, there's a goal! Could be danger for Rangers if he gets it in the right way. It's another one. Well, that's a good ball, and it's his third one.
This is the 4th and obviously sweetest win from 4 in the league to start the season, as the club qualified for the League Cup's last 16 via both Dundee clubs. The campaign was notable for a near 3-month absence of league competition owing to a torrid winter. Celtic, however, couldn't have been more grateful. It gave them a chance to regroup. Since a 2-1 win at home to St Mirren to end September, they had played 11 fixtures and won just the 1 at home to Partick. Thankfully, nobody had pulled away, and Celtic's 5th position was only 4 points back on the early leaders, Dundee United. It also gave Danny McGrain time to recover from a foot injury that kept him out of Scotland's World Cup effort in Argentina and continue to plague his club career. Early markers on the transfer front were laid down by McNeill when he acquired midfielder Murdo McLeod and the Kilmarnock ace Davy Provan. In one of the last games before the torrent of postponements, Rangers had been able to get revenge over Celtic in the semi-final of the League Cup, and whilst the Hoops had fulfilled cup fixtures in and amongst the league's suspension, they would falter at the first real sign of opposition, Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen, after a 5th round replay. Galling, since Celtic's return to the Premier League had seen them eke out a 1-0 triumph over the Dons. A result which had Celtic 8th of 10 teams, but in a strange sort of way, in their absence they only became more prevalent in the title discussion. They remained 4 points off the pace now set by St Mirren, but crucially they had multiple games in hand over the opposition that, for the most part, they still had to meet twice. As McNeill's side worked through the gears, defeating Motherwell and Morton at home, there was already half a glance cast to the remaining Old Firm fixtures, both to be played on the final straight in May. Trips to Pittodrie, Tannadice and Easter Road were all drop points. However, Celtic won every other game, creeping up the division ahead of Rangers by the time the pair were posted at Hampden for the last Rangers home derby. Placed 2nd and 3rd, Dundee United's 35 games compared to the Old Firm's 31 effectively rendered them obsolete in the title race. Alex McDonald grabbed the only goal of the game as opposed Celtic were downed by Rangers 1-0, a result which took Rangers 2nd above Celtic. But as McNeill's men marched through Partick Thistle, St Mirren at Ibrox and at home to Hearts, Rangers had just one game, a win over Aberdeen. Now it was Rangers with the surplus of games. Partick and Hibs remained, while Celtic could solely focus on the derby at Parkhead. Leading by 3 points, a win would confirm the title. Anything else would leave them drastically open to being unseated. Ultimately, and in a farce, the game would not be screened following a television strike. It would live on in infamy as the night 10 men won the league. Down a man and a goal mere minutes into the second half, Celtic rallied. Roy Aitken and George McCluskey goals rallied the Hoops into the lead, only for Rangers to peg them back immediately. Nerve shredded 2 goals in the final 5 minutes rubber stamped Celtic's title. McNeil's first and one hell of a way to do it. The 79-80 campaign started off as well as any other, the Hoops leading the way up to the new year. However, they had been held by Rangers twice and fell to needless defeats on the road at Capello, Rugby Park and Love Street. And yet they carried a 6-point lead over the third placed Rangers despite playing 2 fewer games. Whilst Morton wouldn't be much of a problem, Aberdeen in 4th would. Particularly once the 80s rolled around and Celtic won 4 of their first 12 league fixtures. Most damagingly of all was a home defeat to Aberdeen, who had reeled in McNeil's side into within just 3 points. They had still a game in hand as well, as April trips to Dundee were both without a win. At Tannadice perhaps that was understandable against a Jim McLean side. At Dens Park to the eventually relegated Dundee, unacceptable. It left another showdown at Parkhead 4 games out from the end of the campaign. Celtic still led the league by 2 points, but all the momentum resided with the Dons. However, the title could be effectively taken away from them with a win.
Strachan takes it. Rugby trying to turn it back. Knocked in by Scanlon. Archibald had a chance and it scores. Archie against Clark. 1-1. Kennedy's onside. This is danger for Celtic. Kennedy across. What a chance for McGee. And a goal! Strachan all in the centre. Scanlon checks. Right foot, then left foot. There's a cross. Aim for Archibald. Latchford drops it. Strachan scores.
And with that, everything was out of Celtic's grasp. Relying on heavy favours from Dundee United, they could only get a point out of Ferguson's side 8 days later. While Celtic were able to return to the top with a win at Dens Park, it proved temporary as they suffered another miserable final day against St Mirren, as Aberdeen effectively claimed the title with a 5-0 rout at Easter Road. 7 days later, however, some rare solace.
Headed away by Dawson, kicked back by Snedden and headed by Basai. McGrain, an astonishing goal by McGrain.
Let's remember it for the winner from McGrain, no matter how fortunate and bumbling it was, and not the riotous scenes that followed afterwards. It meant that Celtic escaped a relentless season with a trophy in the bag. From the other competitions, 2 quarter-finals, one infinitely more memorable than the other. Whilst Aberdeen had Celtic's number again in the League Cup, there was a certain famous night under the Parkhead lights in the European Cup.
Snedden forward as the extra man. Cuts infield. Comes it in left-footed. Keeper drops it. It's going to be a goal. McCluskey scores. Keeper. Snedden floating it across. In comes Doyle with a header. Oh, it's a goal! It's a goal! Johnny Doyle scores!
Let's just sweep the 3-0 loss in the Bernabeu reverse under the rug. Juanito was right when he said Noventa minuti nel Bernabeu son molto longo, although he hadn't said it yet, but would have been playing in Los Blancos colours anyway. 90 minutes in the Bernabeu was a long time. 1980 ended as it began dreadfully. Not only were there 4 defeats to 2 key title rivals in Rangers and Aberdeen in the league, Celtic had been dispatched from the League Cup semi-finals by Dundee, and Polytechnica Timisoara had done the same in the Cup Winners' Cup last 16 phase. The goalkeeper situation was yet to have been ironed out as Pat Bonner looked to succeed Peter Latchford. Meanwhile up front, Charlie Nicholas had come through the ranks and many were polarised by his qualities. 1 minute, the dog's bollocks, the next, dog shit, but he was still young. 1981, however, saw an immediate uptick. Frank McGarvey was scoring more prolifically, Nicholas improving every week as the year started with 9-1 on the bounce.
Look at this uncertainty. Here's Charlie Nicholas, it must be. Yes.
Robin. Sullivan.
The key match, the one that swung the destination of the title, a 7-0 home win against St Mirren. Whilst not inherently important, it was Aberdeen's loss at Kilmarnock and Rangers' defeat at Tynecastle that left Celtic 4 clear with a game in hand come the middle of March. By holding Aberdeen at arm's length at Parkhead to end the month and claiming victory at Ibrox on April the 18th, the title was almost a formality. Of all places, it was Tannadice next, a mere 7 days after Dundee United had taken away Celtic's dream of a Scottish Cup at the semi-final stage. One more win would seal the championship.
Well, David Probin looked up, Watch McLeod drifting forward and they head for a great goal. Oh. What a Cullen Anthony touching it then. Mugabe and a good run by Bunn. Must put it away and down.
Even though the league form continued impeccably, with 7 wins from their first 7, the beginning of the 81-82 season was fraught with danger, despite claiming wins over teams like Juventus in the European Cup and away at key rivals Aberdeen and Rangers. And that's because a limp League Cup performance saw Celtic ejected out of the group phase for the first time in a generation, whilst, like Real Madrid 2 years ago, Juventus overturned Celtic's lead in the second leg in Europe.
Potrebbe anche tirare in corsa Virdis, ecco il tiro di sinistro, rete di Virdis, via se Bournemouth, ecco Virdis che tenta di deviare, ecco Provan che aiuta la difesa, ecco McLeod che ha anticipato, Bettega, tiro, rete, ha realizzato Bettega.
So it was down to the league and Scottish Cup once again as early as October, and while Celtic were only stopped in the league by a clear handball from Ralph Milne at Tannadice, McNeil's side commanded a 7-point lead in the league without true opposition. They would have to make do without Charlie Nicholas, who went down to a broken leg in a reserve game at Morton during a month-long league postponement owing to the traditional Scottish weather. And whilst Aberdeen could boast 2 1-0 wins 6 weeks apart from each other, one in the league and one in the cup, the championship was as good as done, and therefore for Celtic, the season. It was only Aberdeen's relentlessness in the second half of the campaign that kept things alive until the final day. Rangers' best efforts to divert the championship back to Pittodrie futile as Celtic's 3-0 win over St Mirren claimed the title. The beginning to the 1982-83 campaign would be just as relentless, but from Celtic's point of view.
Against one, would you believe? And McGarvey and Nicholas. Is he going to be unselfish? Is he taking it himself? He is. His hat-trick. He's got a lot of players up there, splitting buns, and down goes McLeod. And that's been given. It's a goal by McGarvey.
This is the team who dropped 3 points in league competition from the start of the season up to and including a New Year's Day win at Ibrox. If such a start had been made the prior campaign, the trophy would have been handed out by now. Alas, this was still a 3-pronged title picture with the so-called new firm of Dundee United and Aberdeen still within touching distance as 82 became 83. Celtic had won out in the League Cup, sinking Dundee United in the semis before claiming their trophy against their nearest and dearest. The only true blemish to the Hoops' first half of the season was the unfortunate European Cup run.
Gli spagnoli hanno perso l'incontro pur essendo andati in vantaggio con questo gol di Urialde che abbiamo appena.
McNeil's side had been paired off with Ajax in the first round but got through it with a heroic performance in Amsterdam. Then from the frying pan to the fire of San Sebastian and La Liga champions Real Sociedad, who stung Celtic late on in the Basque Country, which ultimately enough to end their time in the European Cup for yet another year. 83 soon verged into the disastrous, dropping points in 7 of their first 12 league matches. Now, as the league entered April in the final 8 games, you could chuck a blanket over the top 3. Celtic came out swinging, winning 3 without conceding, one of which at home to McLean's Dundee United. This victory would only be equalised on April the 20th when they pitched up at Parkhead and claimed a 3-2 win. The Hoops' lead was down to just 1 point with 4 to play, and a daunting trip to Pittodrie was next. They met an Aberdeen desperate for both points to remain in the race, and an Aberdeen that had ejected Celtic from the Cup semi-final. They triumph again over Celtic, all but handing the title on a platter to Jim McLean. Despite 3 victories to end the season, and despite Charlie Nicholas racking up almost half a century of goals that season, it would be a campaign ending with just the League Cup. That summer would spell the end to both Nicholas and McNeil, for now anyway. The 1983-84 season under David Hay had all the hallmarks of being a wonderful one straight out of the blocks, as the new manager got himself comfortable with a win over Rangers in the league at the first time of asking, and a spot in the League Cup semi-finals was gained after Christmas. Despite key losses at Pittodrie and Tannadice, Celtic went into 1984 only 4 points off the pace and with a game in hand. Plus they had competed well in the UEFA Cup.
Il primo gol è di Murdo McLeod, come vediamo, eccolo, splendido pallonetto dal limite.
Beautiful control, good chance here. Great chance for Burns. Goal! Beautiful move.
Celtic riuscirà a accorciare le distanze con un gol di McLeod che trova un varco in mischia per un tiro da lontano che batte Sutton.
From a stunning performance in Denmark, an even better comeback against Sporting and a great defensive display against recent European champions in Nottingham, Celtic were undone in the second leg by Brian Clough's side in the last 16. With almost all of January lost to postponements, losing 1-0 at Pittodrie in early February was an unideal start to the business end of the season, especially now that 6 points split the sides. The campaign would delve into unimaginable horrors as March appeared. Double Dundonian defeats in the league preceded a loss in the League Cup final to Rangers. Celtic now rudderless, staring at a still 6-point deficit, but now having played those 2 games more than leaders Aberdeen. 9 points from their next available 10 certainly helped, especially when 4 of those were earned at home to the Dons and against Rangers. Unfortunately, the season hinged on Celtic's trip to Ibrox on April the 21st, one that was lost and one that left an obviously unassailable 4-point deficit, with Aberdeen still holding 3 games in hand. The campaign lurched from disaster to disaster as another Hampden appointment was made, this time in the Scottish Cup against Aberdeen. The team with the ability to win a domestic treble had faltered on all fronts. There was no comparison to the Leicester team McNeil had shepherded in his first campaign and won the league with some 5 years previously. The 1984-85 season began in the same vein, a quarter-final exit out of the League Cup at the hands of Jim McLean's Dundee United, as well as just 1 win from their opening 5 league fixtures, and if that was disastrous, their European run was rendered comical with the Rapid Vienna farce.
Stays pass. There's Proven. McClare! Played in by Proven. There's McClare. McAdam is there also. Tommy Burns is in the thick of it. Here's one to McLeod. There it is! Good control from McGarvey. That's for Burns. Won the ball to the keeper, and the referee has given the goal. The goalkeeper came for it. The ball was never in the keeper's hands. Burns get up quicker. And there goes the third goal, mobbing the referee and linesman. We've had a stoppage of about 3 minutes now. There's trouble in the box. The Celtic player has gone down off the ball. Like Leo Liner, who was involved. Well, you can, and if that is the view the referee's taking, I think Keenan will be ordered off. There's the red card. Burns in behind the defence. And goalkeeper Ain has exacted his own kind of retribution on Tommy Burns. Another difficult moment for referee Johansson. And there is a missile thrown onto the field. Paul McStay second to it. Still following across towards the referee, protesting now not only about the incident but about that missile being thrown on. And there goes an Austrian player going down, a bottle coming on after the player went down. Now this really is becoming dramatic.
In a tie that Celtic won fairly, UEFA forced them to replay the second leg at least 100 miles from Parkhead. Old Trafford was chosen and the Austrians snuck into the Mancunian night with the 1-0 win. It was they criminally, and not Celtic, competing in the Cup Winners' Cup final against Everton. By 1985, the league had become a write-off thanks to drop points against each of Aberdeen, Rangers and Dundee United. Even though the gap was still only 4 points and 16 games were left, many at Parkhead would concede that Alex Ferguson's side were the stronger of the two. Instead, Celtic had to settle for a run in the Scottish Cup for a consolation prize at the end of what was a frustrating campaign.
Should have done that better. David Dodds. There's a shot, he scored. It is. Here's Aiken. Good drifting ball, it's there, McGarvey.
Admittedly, it was a new firm of Scottish football that had quality, but there was no reason why a team containing talent like Brian McClare and Mo Johnston up top, Paul McStay, Tommy Burns and David Provan in midfield and Roy Aitken at the heart of defence should have been struggling to put trophies on the table. When ejected from both domestic cups by Hibs teams scoring 4 goals against them and early on in competitions as well as a first hurdle exit from Europe, there was no longer an excuse in the 1985-86 season. Celtic started that league campaign at least in near perfect fashion, only dropping 2 points from their first 8 matches. The campaign, however, all swung on a Hearts shock on October the 12th. From then on in, Hearts would not be beaten for months and Celtic limped to just 2 wins before Christmas. Alas, the Hoops had 3 games in hand, so it didn't matter too much that they were in 5th during the festivities. Celtic would only lose 1 more league match, but in the earlier months of 86, the problem became turning draws into wins. 6 draws from 8 fixtures concluded with an absurd 8-goal thriller at Ibrox on March 22nd, a result which left Celtic 7 back on Hearts, but with 2 games in hand and no further fixtures against their title opponents. Hearts remained undefeated in advance of the final day, but were increasingly unconvincing as they edged towards the line. Meanwhile, Celtic belatedly grew into the marathon, 7-1 on the bounce, but it still looked not to be enough ahead of the May 3rd denouement. Celtic needed Dundee to beat Hearts at Dens Park and also win by 4 or more goals at Love Street. 2 teams going for the title, playing away to teams with nothing to play for. It was all going to the wire.
And a great header by Brian McClare. There's Mo Johnston. It's there. It's 3 on the right. There's Johnston. Way to the byline, here's Conor McLeod, now McStay. Play Celtic offside with Bale, here's Johnston, now Conor McLeod. McLeod!
Getting the substitution as Albert Kick comes on. Swinging in and swinging very dangerously. There's a goal! In Hearts, looking slightly ragged, there's a great chance. They've done it! 2-0. A brilliant goal!
And that is why the most important player in the 1985-86 season for Celtic was Albert Kidd, who played for Dundee. 2 goals off the bench had sent the championship herring down the A9 and back to Parkhead. Some parts of the subsequent 86-87 season were understandable. Losing to a top Dynamo Kyiv side governed by Valery Lobanovsky falls under that category, as can begrudgingly a loss in a cup final to Rangers. Less forgivable is a slew of unhappy players wanting to depart Parkhead, the early exit from the Scottish Cup at Tynecastle, as well as a lobbing in of the championship just weeks after securing their first win over Rangers at the 5th time of asking. Level on points with 4 matches to play, Celtic contrived to win just 1 of those games, and on the ground which they claimed the trophy last season. As such, a new look Rangers team governed by Graham Souness snuck in to claim the title, and it was the last act of a middling Davy Hay tenure at Parkhead. The man to replace Hay was the man who he succeeded. 4 years after leaving Parkhead, after the club failed to renew his contract, Billy McNeill, one of the club's most famous sons, was back in the hot seat, and he had one hell of a task on his hands. After life at Main Road and Villa Park, McNeill was quick to work back in Glasgow, overhauling an underachieving squad. Out went McClare, Johnson and McLeod, in came Andy Walker, Frank McAvenny and Billy Stark. The season was also the first without Danny McGrain for 17 years, who was given a free transfer, whilst David Provan retired after 9 years of service. Early exits from both the League Cup and UEFA Cup spoke to the enormous job still yet to be done by McNeill in his second coming, as did a litany of draws in the league. Slowly but surely in the club's centenary season, they picked up the pace.
There's Paul McStay!
Heading into 88, Celtic were in top spot, but they hadn't had a commanding first half of the season. Losing only twice, they had drawn a further 8 and by their standards had been violently inconsistent. But they hadn't lost to champions Rangers or Aberdeen across 8 attempts in the league, and they wouldn't go down to main title rivals Hearts until their final encounter, one that could have sealed the title. All that loss at Tynecastle did, however, was allow McNeil's side to win it in front of their own fans.
McAvenny. That's Rogan. That must be a great chance. Must be yes. Trying to swing it round. That's a very good ball. Walker has done it. Walker again. Oh.
So much like in his first tenure, Billy McNeil had given Celtic the championship in his first season back. 2 weeks prior, they had knocked Hearts out of the running for the Cup, which left the Hoops with a prospect of Dundee United at Hampden. The only thing better than retaining the championship in your first season back, getting your hands on a double.
And here's Gallagher in the rain. Gallagher, goal! That's a better one, a equaliser. The lower one this time, and might be.
And it was a double achieved in what was supposed to be a league hurtling towards the 1990s under a Rangers revolution. From the old world of the new firm to the Ibroxian monopoly led by Graham Souness and Walter Smith, Billy McNeil had been able to offer a bridge, a glorious centenary year when it hadn't looked likely. The 1988-89 season, though, was a disaster. Celtic had barely touched the sides in the European Cup. Rangers had scooped up 2 trophies with ease, and it was up to Celtic to stop them from winning the lot. Billy McNeil had one more trick up his sleeve.
Joe Miller, a great interception by Goff. Stevens in trouble, there's Joe Miller! Oh, here's a smiling figure of Roy Aitken. What a contrast now as Roy Aitken goes up.
Colpo di testa in rete, Hassan porta in vantaggio il Leicester.
Here's Crawford, a chance! It's the only goal for Raith Rovers!
It wasn't hyperbolic to say that the 90s was a torrid time to be a Celtic fan. Not only had Rangers matched their feat of 9 titles in a row, but Celtic had offered virtually no opposition and teetered on the brink. Then Martin O'Neill showed up and revived them. Even with the new firm, even with Graham Souness's revolution at Ibrox, Celtic had still been the preeminent team of the past generation of Scottish football by the time the 90s rolled around. Billy McNeil's time at the club was over by 91. His successor needed to be chosen carefully and correctly amid an always improving Rangers. So when Celtic opted to hire Liam Brady, a legendary footballer but still 35 years of age and entering into his first football manager job nonetheless, it was a quizzical move. From the unimaginative return of Charlie Nicholas to the underperforming Gary Gillespie and Tony Cascarino, for every high note that Rangers hit in the transfer market, Celtic were consistently making the opposite decisions. Only a miraculously good end to the season dredged Celtic into a European position come the end of the 91-92 campaign, a season where they finished some 10 points back on champions Rangers. But that wasn't the low point, nor was being eliminated by Rangers in the Scottish Cup or even their loss on penalties to Airdronians in the League Cup. No, it was this.
Non è in posizione di offside, come a torto ritenevano i giocatori del Celtic. Ancora ha dibattuto la palla alla trasversale, ancora Bovè di testa, gol! Vi avevamo detto prima il passaggio per Osama San ed è gol, clamoroso! Attenzione però al pericoloso Coin, passaggio dalla parte opposta e la palla in rete di rigore. Bovè in buona posizione, il tiro, attenzione, ancora gol!
Going out in the second round of the UEFA Cup was no longer embarrassing, but it was when it was done so convincingly by such a poor team. So when you've won nothing all season and endured a bit of a shit show, it's important for the board to get the fans back on side. Naturally, this board announced plans for a new stadium, shunning the idea of redeveloping Parkhead. They went for the nuclear option and the fans were not happy. Their patience with the Kelly family had gone, even more so when another poor third place finish was teamed with yet more embarrassing cup exits. The 2-0 aberration at Falkirk in the Scottish Cup 4th round this time being the most humiliating. There was a good night in Europe though to be had this season.
Shouts it on this time! With John Collins. The deflection! It's a goal! Good play by Collins. He's made it!
But that was the long and short of it. Eventual UEFA Cup finalist Borussia Dortmund comprehensively disposed of Celtic in the very next round, and there was no shame in that. The following season unravelled, with supporters already pissed off with the jungle turning into an all-seater part of the stadium. Then, when only 2 of their first 11 matches were won, prompting Liam Brady's resignation, there was open revolt. Celts for Change was formed as Lou Macari steadied the ship for a time, but only temporarily, as Celtic finished a morbid 4th place and without Europe. Not that they wouldn't have gone out in the second round for the 4th successive season anyway, sporting this time the perpetrators of Celtic. This time, so much for the Lisbon Lions. The club was skirting dangerously towards a possibility of administration until Fergus McCann pitched up with the money on March the 4th, 1994. Tommy Burns was installed as a Celtic manager ahead of the new season, fresh with optimism as the club once again shat it in the league, finishing a distant 4th in a campaign where the club had to use Hampden owing to the belated development to Parkhead. Handed to them, presumably on a silver platter, Rafe Rovers. Surely to God, this was the shot in the arm that the club needed, a nice easy win to get back on the board. And this happened.
Another chance on this time, must be the equaliser. Here goes Nicholas, that's Walker. By Deer. Chance on here for the equaliser. But he has. Rafe Rovers have won the Coca-Cola Cup.
Because if finishing 4th and not being in Europe whilst Rangers pretty much won the lot wasn't miserable enough for you, here's rock bottom, a loss against Rafe pissing Rovers in the League Cup final on penalties. Fret not, Pierre Van Hooijdonk was signed as Celtic squeaked through the Scottish Cup all the way to the final to play in yet another Hampden game, and he saved his most famous Celtic goal for the very last game of the season. They'd returned to Celtic Park with a dog-shit front line but a decent enough defence. On such foundations, good teams can be built. With a trio of Paul McStay, John Collins and Van Hooijdonk, Andreas Thom and Jackie McNamara were signed. Once again, the Hoops had the best defence in the league, but they had improved drastically in attack, losing just 1 game. Ultimately though, it was at home to Rangers in the 5th match of the season, and given the 4-point deficit come the end of the campaign, that plus 3 further draws against their rivals proved the difference. Rangers had their number in both cup competitions, making it 6 Old Firm matches and not a single victory, and while Celtic returned to Europe, it was yet another second round defeat, although this time more understandably against Paris Saint-Germain, who went on to win the competition. They were inching closer and closer to league success and another 2nd place finish, this time with a 5-point deficit which could once again be traced back to the Old Firm matches. Once again Celtic didn't win 1, instead losing all 4. Had they drawn 3 and lost 1 like the prior season, they'd have won the title. They did have Rangers' number in the quarterfinals of the Scottish Cup though, a 2-0 quarterfinal win, only to piss that promise up against the wall when they couldn't dispatch of Falkirk over 2 games in the semi-final. It was a trophyless season in which Hearts beat them after extra time in the League Cup, and they even bowed out before the second round of European competition, this time to Hamburg. They had a talent like Paolo Di Canio and Alan Stubbs, but then you looked across the city and saw Rangers were acquiring talent like Brian Laudrup and Paul Gascoigne. It was hard to see a way back for Celtic. Then, Tommy Burns was sacked. In a season where it was imperative for Celtic to do well, if not for ending a league drought but for stopping Rangers from acquiring title number 10 in a row, this had been the most disastrous of starts. Wim Jansen had taken over from Tommy Burns, and already by mid-August there was consternation. Both league games had been lost. They needed to pull back a deficit in the UEFA Cup qualifying against little old Tyrrell Innsbruck, and had needed extra time to eliminate St Johnstone from the League Cup. Scottish talent in Darren Jackson from Hibs and Craig Burley from Chelsea had been teamed with continental class in Sheffield Wednesday's Reggie Blinker in exchange for Paolo Di Canio, as well as a certain striker from Feyenoord. He was called Henrik Larsson. After a 2-0 win in Perth in the league, Celtic were afforded 3 weeks off, partly due to the international break and partly due to the death of Princess Diana. Make your own jokes here, but her death couldn't have come at a better time, since it postponed the usual early Old Firm derby against Rangers until mid-November, giving Celtic time to turn things around. When that fixture arrived, Celtic had booked themselves in for a League Cup final. They'd taken a strong Liverpool team the distance in Europe and had only gone out on away goals, and they had strung together 8 consecutive wins in the league. It also allowed the club time to bring in Borussia Dortmund's Paul Lambert. He arrived equidistant between 2 Old Firm games, neither of which were won, and so Celtic slipped behind Rangers and into third. In a dress rehearsal for the League Cup final, Celtic got back to winning ways with a 4-0 thrashing of Dundee United. Now it was time for Hampden.
Horse picked out his compatriot Mark Reaper, who powered his header into the net via the upright, deflected off Maurice Malpas's boot past the unfortunate Steve Dykstra. Reggie Blinker finding Craig Burley, apparently onside, who headed...
Cup finals are always important, but, especially against lesser opposition, League Cup finals can feel secondary. Not this one. This one was crucial in grabbing some much needed momentum ahead of the festive period and the New Year's derby with Rangers. Momentum attained 10 points from 4 matches. Celtic put their feet up on Christmas Day, only 1 point off the Rangers' pace after 18 games. Then a trip to Perth undid quite a lot of that hard work. The visit of Rangers to Parkhead was now must win.
Rangers, you feel, are here for the taking. It's Craig Burley! That's Lambert! What a way for Zetland!
And they did win, cutting the deficit back to 1 with 16 matches left on the clock. Whilst Rangers' Marco Negri had been scoring at such a stupid rate of knots, Celtic added their own European firepower that December with Rosenborg's Harald Brattbakk, but it would be a certain Swede who had dazzled Parkhead. The Hoops would only be deterred by trips to Fir Park and Tynecastle, dropping 4 points in advance of March. As such, a 4-point gap to Rangers had opened up, with Jim Jeffrey's Hearts still in the race, wedged in between. Progress had been made beyond Morton, Dunfermline and Dundee United, prompting an Old Firm doubleheader to begin April in a time where nerves were being frayed at both ends of the city. Hearts had held Celtic at Parkhead, so the title race was almost as you were heading into April. Celtic leading the league with 6 to play, 2 ahead of Hearts, 3 ahead of Rangers. The Old Firm tests were next.
Tested Celtic already once with a driven shot. This one's McCoy! Right, McCoy's gone through the middle. He's not going to need any of them. He's going to go all the way. A magnificent goal from...
Suggestions, but Swedish international Jonas Thern had his own idea for breaking the deadlock. Been seriously challenged until he was within shooting range. Then the finish. Ibrox erupted.
Both of which flunked. Celtic had not only paved the way for Hearts and Rangers to go at it in the Scottish Cup final, but they had handed the title initiative to their rivals on a silver platter. 4 games to go, Celtic and Rangers were level on points. Instantly there was a chance to put the pressure on, which was successful with a bizarrely serene 4-1 thrashing of Motherwell. 24 hours later, Rangers buckled at Pittodrie, swinging the title back to Parkhead. There was more than one sting to this tale though. 6 days later, as Celtic couldn't buy a goal against relegation-threatened Hibs at home. Meanwhile, Rangers' impressive 3-0 triumph at Tynecastle put just 1 point between the sides. May the 2nd was Rangers' turn to put the pressure on, a presumed gimme at home to Kilmarnock, while Celtic visited Dunfermline the following day.
Remarkable 9 titles. That was in 1989 and 1998. The Ibrox stranglehold in Scottish football has been all but ended by Ali Mitchell's goal 3 minutes into injury time.
Ali Mitchell with the killie goal that devastated Ibrox. Now Celtic found themselves 90 minutes at East End Park away from stopping 10 in a row. Just one win, didn't matter who, didn't matter how, one win and it was all over.
There's a dunk. Taken up well by Jensen, there's a run through again, that's it! Celtic have scored! Now he's kicking every ball. Like an orchestra leader there, and that is just drifting, oh it's in! It's a goal, Dunfermline!
It wasn't fucking over. Enter Helicopter Sunday before Helicopter Sunday. 7 small minutes away, Celtic were from the title when Craig Falconbridge spooned one into the net. When people expected a Larson or a McCoy, they received Mitchell and Falconbridge. Celtic hosted St Johnstone, Rangers travelled to Tannadice. Celtic just needed to match the Rangers result. It seemed bananas then, just as it does today, that neither game was shown live on domestic television.
Larson. Donnell is alongside him. Larson lining up for the shot. What a start for Celtic!
Knew that if Celtic won at home to St Johnstone, all would be lost. The Rangers still emerged victorious at Dundee United to make it 2-0. Zetterman, a looping header, beating the Finnish international Antti Niemi in the Rangers goal.
It's a good pass. In for Blackback! He's done it!
After 10 long years, Harold Brattbakk with a goal that summed it all up. There was no 10 in a row. Had it not been for that fact, it would have been quite a middling title performance. Wim Jansen came, saw, conquered and fucked off. From the minutest of peaks, Celtic came crashing back down to earth with the hiring of Josef Venglos, a Czech manager who hadn't worked in British football since the beginning of the 90s with Aston Villa and was a decade further on from his managerial peak. And it showed. At least he stayed with recent Celtic traditions in going out of not just one but 2 second rounds in European competition. First in the second qualifying round to Dynamo Zagreb in the Champions League, and then in the UEFA Cup second round to FC Zurich. Edgeronians proved a first hurdle stumbling block in the League Cup, and whilst it took a while for the team to kick on, they almost haired back to the precipice of the Championship, but for a 2-week dip against St Johnstone and, terminally, Rangers on May the 2nd. Further heartache followed against the same team in the Scottish Cup final, plunging Celtic supporters' moods down further. The signings were no longer working. Whilst Mark Viduka scored prolifically in the 99-2000 season, Celtic missed Henrik Larsson massively. In a time where Parkhead needed more Stilian Petrov, they received plenty of shite. Raphael Shite, to be precise. Steering the club through the shit show of the 99-2000 season was a novel idea. Novel because it didn't work. Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes as joint managers. Whilst the League Cup was won against Aberdeen, they also masterminded the 3-1 home defeat in the third round of the Cup to Inverness Cali Thistle, combined with a now traditional European second round exit this time to Lyon under 21 point deficit in the SPL. Celtic were quickly discarded with. To ensure that Rangers couldn't build up another head of steam again, Celtic needed to make their next decision count. A Celtic fan in his youth, Martin O'Neill, had enormous pedigree either side of the white line. A European Cup winner with Nottingham Forest, his work in turning Leicester City into cup winners in the Premier League age was nothing short of miraculous. The new man got his initial signings absolutely on the money. First through the door was Chris Sutton, looking delighted here by the way, as Mark Viduka moved south. Jos Valgaeren was a shrewd acquisition for the defence, Alan Thompson the same from Villa from the midfield. A whole new spine with the returning Henrik Larsson from injury. Parkhead had a whole new lease on life.
And Stubbs and Larsson are there! Taking a second, Moravcik sends it in! And they have... And they're queuing up here! It's another one for... Larsson, oh he's in! Henrik Larsson! Tessa delivers, Larsson's header! He's done it again! Now Celtic got another one left in them. Sutton is there! Yes they have!
And if it didn't before this, it certainly did afterwards. After, quite simply put, the best old firm league game from a Celtic perspective, O'Neill's side simply carried on in the same vein. 4-1 on the spin, 3-1 after, and only 4 points dropped in advance of the second Old Firm game of the season. To avoid the viewership dropping like a stone, we won't show you that one, but just know that Rangers only managed the 5, as Celtic sat a staggering 12 points ahead of their rivals anyway, i.e. the league was wrapped up in O'Neill's first season and it wasn't even December yet. In fact, they would drop only 4 points from their next 19 matches. It wasn't a title win, it was a bloody massacre. And with the season all wrapped up, there was the offering of a treble too. Not in Europe, of course, you can already guess which stage they went out in already there, without me telling you. Obviously, the second round. No, Hampden awaited.
Apart from that, he's been quite excellent. They're all in there. Henrik Larsson was screaming for it when he led wide. Does he? A bit of hat-trick coming up. It is.
It had been a mesmeric season as Celtic kept winning on the field and off the field with their transfers. Neil Lennon and Didier Agate, both added as O'Neill's strike rate never let up. If the 15-point deficit to Rangers had been a bloody massacre in 01, the following season's tally of 103 points was downright dominant. The fact that their rivals got 85 points and still didn't come anywhere close was now the yardstick. And sure, Rangers were able to claim Celtic's number in both of the domestic cups, but for the first time in a long time, Celtic had kinda become relevant on the continental scene once again. For the first time, they had made it to the Champions League group stages and had a good hit list, including former European champions in Ajax, Porto and Juventus, before being funnelled into the UEFA Cup, where only penalties stopped them from going through against the last two finalists of the Champions League, Valencia. Everything geared up for another monumental European campaign ahead of the 2002-03 season. Whilst it was embarrassing to be dumped out of the Champions League qualifiers by some no-name Swiss side, the world, and especially Britain, would come to get acquainted with FC Basel fairly quickly, as they got results against both Liverpool and Man United that season. Ultimately, they'd be knocked out on away goals, and soon enough, it would be known as quite the blessing in disguise. Not to the domestic campaign, Rangers swept up both cup trophies before one of the more caricatured title races ever seen. In terms of head-to-head results with Rangers, Celtic shaded it, winning the last two whilst the first was drawn and the Light Blues won the second in December. With another 100-point season just about feasible, Celtic slipped up just the once away to Hearts on April the 19th, but it was still recoverable. Rangers were beaten, then it became all about goal difference. 4 beyond Dunfermline and Motherwell, 6 beyond Dundee, and on the final day another 4 stuck beyond Kilmarnock. 97 points, 98 goals scored, plus 72 goal difference in any other season, any other league, it'd be enough. A final day that had started with the team split by 1 goal scored whilst holding the same amount of wins, draws, losses and goal difference. Celtic scored 4, conceded none, Rangers conceded 1. But scored 6. By 1 solitary goal the season was over, and come the end of the campaign it was one that didn't contain a single piece of silverware to show for it. All that hard work that had been carved out back home, but it didn't even begin to tell half the story of Celtic's 2002-03 season.
Sutton put it up well, Petrov. That must be this time, surely yes. Hodgson does it again. Healy flowing forward, there's a chance, David Fernandez is going to lob the goalkeeper, and it's in.
John Hodgson up! Oh, what a save by Cleveland, Henry Larson was there! To Agat. And now Chris Sutton. Can he, oh, Hodgson slipped. Oh, Henrik Larsson, surely, for Celtic!
That is a very good ball indeed, and it just knocks away, it's in.
With the free kick. Chris Sutton timed his jump well. John Hodgson! Celtic have equalised!
Thompson, that's a decent enough ball. Maloney with a chance. He's done it.
One is Hodgson. Another is Alan Johnson, who heads Celtic in front.
From the barely noticeable Lithuanians of round 1, the cocky English press that backed Blackburn in round 2 to the first difficult nut to crack in Celta Vigo in the third round, Celtic were through to the other side of Christmas for once. When Kevin Karanye silenced Parkhead inside of half an hour, Celtic wouldn't have believed they would have the tie all neatly wrapped up in a bow by the 11th minute back in Stuttgart in the 4th round. Next was Liverpool and a quarter-final. It was Celtic's third attempt at dispatching of the English side in Europe. The first in '66 they had lost because of a wrongful offside call. The second in '97 was only down to away goals. The third time...
Presence of John Armstrong, surely try to get as much balls into John as they possibly can this evening.
There he is again. Thompson. Oh, and it's 1-0! And what a return! Smith. And Reece still. Heskey, chance for Liverpool. Heskey, 1-1. Henrik Larsson.
Thompson. Yes!
the shot, got more room now. And Celtic surely are in the semi-final.
No mistake would be made, as it took just 2 minutes for Henrik Larsson to further establish his Parkhead legend in the first leg before a European away performance for the ages 7 days later at Anfield, as Alan Thompson and John Hartson put a Celtic side without Larsson or Sutton through to the semis. A similar route would be needed through Portuguese outfit Boa Vista.
Behind from Martelinho. Oh, and it's sliced in. That's a nice touch. Larsson, yes! Beautifully played by Stilian Petrov. Good save. Hartson the medical man. Larsson must be! It is!
And the same method applied. A Larsson goal in the home leg, but a backs against the wall performance back in Porto. For the first time since '67, Celtic were into a European final. Awaiting them would be FC Porto and a certain Jose Mourinho.
But it's not all over.
In a classic string of UEFA Cup finals, this stood right up there. Jose Mourinho had announced himself to the rest of Europe, Celtic the unfortunate victims in his tyrannical sweeping through the continent. Whilst he would graduate to that big-eared trophy the following season, Celtic actually would take part, easing through Lithuanian and Hungarian opposition in the qualifiers, only to be handed one of the more difficult groups. A point at home to the almighty Bayern Munich, whilst also defeating both a prime Lyon outfit and a decent Anderlecht at Parkhead, laid on a final matchday shootout at the Stade de Gerland. The winner would be in the last 16, the loser funneled into the UEFA Cup.
Up and pounds home his first Champions League goal of the season, and at Juninho's long-range effort has the steam to beat Magnus. Lucky picks it up, promptly beats Coupe. Juninho put to the spot, and he makes it 3-2 with time.
8 days later, less devastatingly, the League Cup would be surrendered at Easter Road to Hibs, but it would be the last meaningful game Celtic would be beaten in for 4 months. That meant ruining Rangers in the New Year's derby, eliminating Rangers from the Scottish Cup on March the 7th, beating fucking Barcelona 3 days later, eliminating that same Barca team with a mesmeric 0-0 draw in the Camp Nou, before pitching up at Ibrox 4 days later and all but putting the league to bed. Then it was Villarreal and a 1-1 draw via a Henrik Larsson goal at home, which was a nice callback to the previous year's run to the final. Unfortunately, there would be no such luck at the Madrigal. The up-and-coming Villarreal team, soon to be Champions League semi-finalists, would eliminate Celtic 2-0. If they thought they were unlucky in being drawn the group they had done in the 03-04 season, then get a load of this shit. Both Barcelona and AC Milan. Then you chuck in a decent Shakhtar Donetsk team undervalued by UEFA coefficient, and you have last in the group and no Europe after Christmas. Once the continental game was put away for another season, Celtic could focus on catching Rangers. Between a loss at Ibrox on November the 20th and a loss at Parkhead to Rangers on February the 20th, Celtic won all but one game, but that potentially 12-point swing meant Celtic were chasing heading into the business end of the season. It would comfortably require 90+ points, while Celtic were pristine in picking up another Scottish Cup, this time against Dundee United, and they had grabbed a 2-1 win at Ibrox in the last Old Firm game of the season. There had been a needless home defeat to Hibs on the final day of April. The lay of the land tantalising into May 22nd. Celtic travelled to Fir Park, Rangers were also away at Easter Road. Celtic had a 2-point advantage, Rangers had a 4-goal advantage. To win the title, you would almost certainly need to win your match. The SPL trophy was in a helicopter, hovering over Scotland.
It comes back to Robo, drives to the cross, and Kosovo, from there at the near post, and Robo, McDonald. McDonald scored for Motherwell! He's on his own, Britton's in the middle, wants to cut back, could be a second. Here's McDonald again, he scored again! And we're travelling the championship, and it's all over, and Alec McLeish is swamped by his backroom staff.
Leicester City didn't just strike it lucky in the days of a Martin O'Neill or a Claudio Ranieri or a Vichai. They didn't used to be good once upon a time in the haze of black and white footage or no coverage whatsoever. This is when Wembley was quite the common occurrence. This is the first peak of Leicester City. In 2025 you can't even buy a Freddo for 9 pence. In 1884 it bought you a football club start-up. That's exactly what a bunch of church-going lads did in Leicester, forming the club known today as Leicester City, known back then as Leicester Fosse. Within 10 years they had opened their doors at Filbert Street and played their first Football League game, a 4-3 loss at Grimsby Town in September 1894. 10 years after knocking about in Division 2 with the odd FA Cup proper game, they acquired this lovely little shade of blue, sadly behind a watermark which probably wasn't around in 1903. By 1908 they had finally gotten their blue asses into the top tier of English football, only to concede a mammoth 102 goals in 38 games, which makes their recent attempts at Premier League survival look good. Granted, 12 of those goals came in one match when some allegedly hungover Leicester players turned up to Nottingham Forest and wound up on the receiving end of an English top-flight record scoreline. However, Leicester were already down by the time this match, third from last in the calendar, was played. If any football team could be grateful for a world war, it was Leicester, who just scraped together enough votes for a re-election in 1915. When football resumed, the club came back with fresh impetus and a fresh name: Leicester City. The 20s were definitely roaring from a Leicester City perspective. They got themselves their first full-time manager in Peter Hodge. Filbert Street was significantly renovated, and via the goals of Arthur Chandler and John Duncan's leadership, the club not only gained promotion to the top flight, they survived and even thrived. Third place in 1928 became second place and just a point away from that elusive first ever league championship the following season. However, when factoring in Sheffield Wednesday's easing off of the gas pedal, it wasn't as close as it appeared. This wouldn't be the work of a Peter Hodge, but of Willie Orr, who replaced the club's first permanent manager after he dipped to Manchester City in 1926. It wouldn't be the last Filbert Street saw of Hodge, however, as the club fired Orr for running a pub. He wasn't the first influential member of Leicester City to be sacked for wanting to secure his future in a world of average wages. The club's cornerstone, John Duncan, was fired for the same thing 2 years prior. Hodge returned as manager in 1932 and realistically came the closest Leicester had ever gotten to a major footballing trophy. At the third attempt in 1934, the club reached the FA Cup semi-finals after previously losing at the last 8 stage to Newcastle United in 1910 and Cardiff City in their promotion year of 1925. Having gone away to Preston North End to seal their spot in the semi-final at St Andrews against Portsmouth, Leicester could be considered favourites to not only reach Wembley but be frontrunners for the trophy. Alas, they were thrashed 4-1 and later that year Peter Hodge suddenly passed away, which sent the club into limbo. They would end up yo-yoing between the top 2 divisions up to the Second World War. This time, armed conflict would not be a safety net at Filbert Street. Thankfully for all involved, John Duncan was forgiven and he would be the club's guardian in the manager's hot seat to steer them away from the threat of liquidation after the war. Whilst the club would remain in the second tier for all of his tenure, they did finally get to Wembley. Via the club that thwarted them in their only previous semi-final attempt in Portsmouth, the eventual champions of England no less, City were unfortunate in being handed an upwardly mobile Wolves team recently handed to a certain Stan Cullis. Unfortunate too that they were missing talisman with Don Revie, who missed the game via a fucking nosebleed. Off the back of that heartache, Duncan departed again. In his place was Norman Bullock, who espoused of a 5-year plan. Within 4.5 years, he had taken the club back to the top flight. That plan involved signing Arthur Rowley for a paltry 14k from Fulham. He was supposed to be replacing fan favourites Don Revie and Jack Lee. Instead, he would become the fan favourite, winding up scoring 265 goals, including 41 in the 52-53 season, tallies that are unlikely to be broken anytime soon by a Leicester player. Sadly, the plan didn't stretch beyond the 5 years, as Bullock failed to strengthen in time for the increased quality of the opponents, and City immediately plummeted back down to the second tier. That summer, Dave Halliday took charge of the club off the back of winning the league up north with Aberdeen. In his second season, he had returned the club to where it belonged, and consummately too, securing promotion back to the top flight in 1957 with 4 games remaining after a 5-star performance over West Ham. After a stable season in the top division, Halliday deemed Arthur Rowley no longer up to snuff, leaving him 8 shy of the club's goal-scoring record. That looked like a dopey idea, and November 58 arrived, and a 3-0 home loss to Blackpool left them rooted to the foot of the division. A change was needed. Matt Gillies was the man hired to rescue Leicester City, and there was cause for optimism. They were by no means the worst attack in the league, nor did they rank the lowest for their defensive numbers. The problem was the mood, as several players had handed in transfer requests. Gillies, like John Duncan, had been a player at Filbert Street, and his comparatively modest career ended at Leicester after 103 league games. It was some punt by the club to choose an inexperienced manager for what was an extraordinarily difficult task. After an initial loss at Portsmouth, Leicester came out firing, more wins in 4 weeks than in the 15 games that preceded Gillies' appointment. By Christmas Day, the club were out of the drop zone, and despite a rotten start to 1959, a 6-game concertina run of draws and victories in March and April pulled them clear. Leicester City were to be a top-flight team in the new decade after all, and it certainly was the swinging 60s at Filbert Street. Before the 1959-60 campaign started, Gillies made one of the all-time great transfer decisions when acquiring Chesterfield youth prospect Gordon Banks for just £7,000. Further to this policy, Frank McClintock was also handed his debut. The brilliantly named Albert Cheeseborough was also acquired that summer, top scoring for the club in what was a comfortable mid-table season of top-flight league football. On their day, Leicester were beginning to show themselves up to being quite dangerous opponents. Just ask the reigning champions of England Wolves, who were doubled. Also, ask the likes of Spurs, Leeds, Chelsea, Newcastle and Man United, or, most impressively, eventual champions Burnley. And that kind of form should have resulted in a long old cup run. Whilst WBA had been slain in the 5th round, Wolves had chosen the opportune moment to defeat the Foxes on the way to claiming the trophy. Leicester's first tilt at the League Cup was melded into a morbid start to the subsequent 60-61 campaign, as eventual finalists Rotherham United dumped City out at the second round stage. Meanwhile, Leicester struggled amongst the bottom feeders in the league. But a switch was flicked on after Christmas, right in time for the Cup's return. 13 unbeaten, which was timed just right to send the Foxes scurrying into the semi-final beyond Oxford United, Bristol City, Birmingham City and Barnsley. It was a run which catapulted Leicester into 6th place by mid-March, their final resting place in the league. But a run ended at the Hawthorns on March 11th, which may well have factored into City's performances against Sheffield United in the semis. Elland Road, goalless draw, City Ground, more of the same. Finally, in what was turning out to be a full-blown UK tour, goals from Jimmy Walsh and Ken Leake booked Leicester City's place at Wembley with a 2-0 win over the Yorkshire outfit in Birmingham. Of all teams to face, league champions Bill Nicholson's Spurs were the ones waiting. Matt Gillies pulled an incredible stunt by dropping Ken Leake. Leake, the man who had scored in every round of the Cup. 1 against Oxford, 2 against Bristol City, 2 more against Birmingham, 1 against Barnsley, and finally the second in the semi-final decider. And yet the Foxes were holding their own, despite a knee injury to Len Chalmers, which essentially restricted the club to 10 men as the fullback limped up and down the wing.
In charge of the game was referee Jack Kelly, a Lancashire man at his best on a bigger game. Right, he passed to Jones. A goal! To Spurs' dismay, referee Kelly ruled it offside and speed. This time the ball went to Dyson. That dynamic midget smartly got his head to it. Over! Suddenly Bobby Smith seized his chance. Goal!
Spurs' unrelenting pressure brought reward again. The ball was centred. Dyson headed a great goal.
Eventually they succumbed to perhaps one of the finest teams in world football at the time. Understandable, even if they hadn't been handicapped by a team selection issue and injury. Spurs, therefore, were the first double winners of the 20th century. And this created quite the bind for the newfangled Cup Winners' Cup, since Spurs qualified for the European Cup by virtue of winning the Championship. Therefore, Leicester would take their place in Europe. The possibilities were near endless, from Fiorentina and Werder Bremen to Ajax and Atletico Madrid. Drawn into a preliminary round, Leicester looked a little closer to home when they comfortably dispatched of Northern Irish outfit Glenavon. They would receive one of the 4 big fish soon enough, however, when the last 16 phase was drawn.
Inglesa, y aunque el balón va a gol, el árbitro decide que se saque el castigo. Que va en... Primer gol de la noche. Vean la perfecta ejecución del castigo nuevamente.
Only a late equaliser at home stopped Leicester taking a lead to the Spanish capital, and whilst there, they were manhandled out of the competition and subsequently out of Europe for the next 36 years. The 61-62 campaign would become a non-event after that, the Foxes finishing 14th and coming nowhere in the domestic cups. The following season, however, would more than make up for that one. In what had thus far been a middling season, Leicester clicked into gear on Boxing Day yet again. This time they not only went unbeaten but won 10 straight in all competitions, a run which not only booked the club into the quarter-final of the FA Cup but had them ahead of Spurs at the top of the league. And whilst that invincibility streak was lost against West Ham on April the 13th, a 4-3 triumph over Manchester United sent Leicester top of the league again, and we'd had Easter already, so they were more than worth it. That latest victory would prove to be the dress rehearsal for the 63 FA Cup final, whilst Mike Stringfellow's winner beat Bill Shankly's Liverpool at Hillsborough in the semi-final, and a Dennis Law goal for Man United sunk Southampton. After finishing 18 points and 4 positions ahead of United, as well as taking a win and a draw off Matt Busby's side in the league, Leicester could be considered favourites. But the Foxes would enter the match in drastic form, losing their last 4 league fixtures to finish a distant 4th.
With pass, Law, he can do it, he's done it! Oh, a beautiful ball to Charlton, we're going to see a shot surely. And a lovely ball! Nasty looking centre.
Gordon Banks wouldn't make such an error at Wembley again, and he would quickly turn himself from zero to hero in the League Cup campaign in the 63-64 season. It was a campaign that came to the boil slowly as the Foxes were handed the toffee of lower league Aldershot Town, Gillingham, Tranmere Rovers and Norwich City before sinking West Ham United over 2 legs in the semi-finals. Criminally, the finals were still busy being played over 2 legs and away from the distracting television cameras, so just take my word that Gordon Banks put in a mesmeric performance as Leicester edged out Stoke in the Filbert Street second leg. Leicester had their first major trophy. They wouldn't have to wait long for their attempt at a second one. In another mid-table malaise of a league campaign, the League Cup came to the fore once again in the 64-65 season. It was a more circuitous road to the Stamford Bridge first leg of the final, with both Peterborough United and Crystal Palace requiring replays. There were some dazzling away performances, 5 beyond Grimsby and a tantalising 8 smashed past Coventry. And so, with a comfortable 2-legged semi-final affair against Plymouth out of the way, Leicester plotted their defence of the Alan Hardacre Trophy. The resolve of the Foxes was seen in London, pulling back Tommy Docherty's side not just once, but twice, only to falter late on to an Eddie McCready winner. A goalless return to Filbert Street 3 weeks later killed the dream. Without much promise on the horizon in regards to cup success over the next 2 seasons, Leicester were allowed to tiptoe into consecutive top 8 finishes in the league. Manchester City had their number in 3 of their next 6 attempts at silverware, and I hope they don't factor into this video again. It's called foreshadowing. Gordon Banks became a World Cup winner before Stoke snapped him up for 50k in 1967. As goalkeeping transitions go, however, the still world-class 30-year-old Banks was exchanged for academy graduate Peter Shilton. not bad going. After a regression to 13th place in the 1967-68 season combined with a drastic start to the subsequent campaign, Matt Gillies departed just a month into his second decade as manager at Filbert Street. The last straw was a 7-1 evisceration at Goodison Park, which left the club in the bottom 3 after winning only 3 of their first 21 matches. Gillies' coach Bert Johnson was sacked and the manager walked in protest. Once again, Leicester's decision-making on the managerial front was a bold one, as they acquired Franco Farrell after stints at Weymouth and Torquay United. Formerly a member of the West Ham Academy, which birthed some of the all-time greats, Leicester hoped that would rub off on Filbert Street. Instead of an almost traditional upturn in form after Christmas, Leicester followed in the same vein under the Irishman, winning only 5 games after the festivities. It ended the Foxes' 12-year association with the top flight of English football. However, that told only a morsel of the second half of the 68-69 campaign, and it all started with a frostbitten Oakwell on my mum's birthday, if you must know. There, the Foxes had been able to take Barnsley back to their place to destroy their cup dreams. To call the remainder of the run scraping by would be an understatement. In the 4th round, Millwall were beaten at the Den by a 1-0 scoreline. Get used to that result. The run looked to be over when O'Farrell's side were unable to defeat Liverpool in front of their own fans. No matter, Andy Lockhead popped up with a winning goal in front of the Kop in the replay. Yes, another 1-0 triumph for them tricky Foxes. Mansfield Town in the quarter-final, supposed to be respite. Instead, yes, it was another 1-0 as Rod Fern snatched the all-important goal which sent Leicester to Hillsborough to meet West Bromwich Albion. Where Leicester had been largely unsuccessful in the cup phase during the 60s, Albion were the reigning cup champions and had another gold medal to their name by the way of the 66 League Cup final. No matter, it was Matt Gillies' last great signing, Alan Clark, who split the sides with the only goal of the game, of course 1-0. That day, Villa Park played host to Manchester City, an Everton semi-final, and if you've been paying attention, you'll know who was due to meet Leicester at Wembley.
Woollett with it. Somerby back to Young. It's beautiful goal scored by Young.
It's 16 years since Leicester conceded 6 goals. And 6-2 it is.
1969 was a strange year for Leicester City. They teamed a trip to Wembley with a relegation. That was the golden age gone. The next quarter of a century was hard work. These are those endless yo-yo years of Filbert Street. Save for a Christmas hangover, Leicester City were not perfect in gaining promotion in the 1970-71 season after just 2 campaigns away from the big time. It prompted the end of Franco Farrell at Filbert Street as he was sent up north to succeed Matt Busby at Manchester United. Jimmy Blomfield was the man in line to take on the top flight Foxes after he had got Orient up to the 2nd tier and stabilised them. His first competitive game at Filbert Street was a throwing in at the deep end exercise.
Oh, and a good piece of play here as Whitworth comes in on the blind side, and Fern! No, yes! Whitworth!
With double winners Arsenal otherwise engaged, Leicester were plucked to meet Bill Shankly's Liverpool, a Liverpool containing names like John Toshak, Ian Callaghan and Emlyn Hughes. No mugs. Ambition was there instantly. Not only were names like John Samuels, Keith Weller and Alan Birchin all coming in, but Peter Shilton was barred from leaving despite efforts from Derby and Arsenal to prize him away. Leicester's biggest crime in the 71-72 season, a bizarre one in almost every aspect in English football, was that of being inconsistent in 12th. A normal character in what was temporarily an abnormal world.
Simmons on the edge of the box. It's gone in! It's
Charlton. And in it comes again for Lauderjohn.
The big match or match of the day cameras not being there for any kind of success dilutes my point, but there were signs of an upwardly mobile club in triumphs against the likes of Man United, Liverpool again and the double over Nottingham Forest. Optimism was mixed with technological advances set by Blomfield, from the all-white kit ahead of the 72-73 season to the enormous balloon he had placed over the Filbert Street turf.
The ball is still in play. Birds all again. It's there.
Now, it wouldn't work all the time. Again, nowhere in the Cups. Leicester placed 4 places lower, but their goal record was near identical, shipping the same amount and scoring only 1 fewer. This despite the acquisition of Huddersfield Town's mercurial forward Frank Worthington, and yet again keeping hold of by now an integral Peter Shilton in goal.
Aiming for Springer. Samuels. On for Worthington. Good touch. Oh,
given back to Leicester by Gemmell. Here's Worthington with a chance. Yes!
It was a campaign that began with an unfamiliar invincibility streak, which only faltered with a late home defeat against Coventry, which prompted a rapid unravelling. But when you've got artists of the game in Weller and Worthington, there were always going to be those undeniable afternoons. From the 3-goal takedown of Spurs, a post-Christmas defeating of Arsenal, to a 5-goal rattling of Ipswich and another thrashing of Chelsea. Again, another season of mid-table comfort. The position may have improved by 7, but the fine margins ensured it was another campaign of bobbing between the 37 to 42 point marker. No, 73-74 became more renowned in the East Mids for that most typical of Leicester City environs, a march on the FA Cup.
Stringfellow. Worthington. Stringfellow.
That was Worthington, and here's Glover. Oh, yes! What a fine goal.
There's the cross again. And yes! It's Steve Earle, the number 2. Goals. Waters. Oh, yes! Oh, yes! For the... To Highway. Set up on for the cross. Toshak was deep. And it's there! The ball went loose.
To get so damn close to Wembley again, so close to a 4th attempt at winning that ever-elusive FA Cup, was gut-wrenching, for Peter Shilton especially. There was clearly an improvement at Filbert Street, but it was just too glacial in its pace. That summer he departed for Stoke. No longer could Leicester refuse the type of money being offered, £325,000 being the figure in the sum of 74. His replacement was Mark Wallington, who went on to make more appearances for the club than both Shilton and his predecessor, Gordon Banks. 460 games, a Leicester record for a goalkeeper, until certain Kasper Schmeichel pitched up.
Oh, chance for Daniels. Yes, he's got it. Exactly the same thing as happened.
Chipped in again towards Bodley, and it's a go there. Oh, and what a goal! Scored by John Samuels.
And for a few years, save for the odd stolen point or position either way, Leicester City had gradually become First Division furniture. Not a menace in the cup competitions, not in any danger of sinking into a relegation swamp, just there. The ceiling had been reached. 18th place of 75 was bolstered to 7th the following campaign, but it all fell under the umbrella of being mid-table fodder. Stagnation had been acquired, a sometimes useful tool, but now the club had reached a stick or twist moment.
Referee waving his arm to get play continuing. Good try by Emmanuel!
Beating bluntly, and here's Royal. And Wellington lucky, and in the end was made to pay for it.
They twisted. These cherry-picked results appear at odds with the most bang average of seasons. 40 points comfortably reached, 11th place being the definition of mid-table, but the 76-77 campaign was one where frustration spilled over. There was Frank Worthington being vocal in a public arena. There were the seeds of discontent sown, and by the summer of 77 the move had been made. Blumfield was out. In his place, Frank McClintock, and the following season was a tale as old as time, Beauty and the Beast.
Now Latchford to drive it left footed. It's there. Not far. Here's McDowell. Left foot shot.
Beauty being in pretty fucking short supply, as the Foxes' top scorers were Roger Davies and Mark Goodwin with 4 each. 4 one-goal wins were barely quenchable oases sprinkled across an arid desert of despair. Both Merseyside clubs came to Filbert and slapped Leicester about. A trip to Leeds in late March was more of the same, as McClintock finally gave in and jumped before he could be pushed in April. They had been double digits away from surviving. There was no longer a guarantee that Leicester would be back so quickly this time around.
Christie up and scores.
Even with the best will in the world and/or the best quality in the world, there was just a malaise about the place as Leicester slumped to 17th in the second tier, their worst return since 1949, and obviously this time they didn't have an FA Cup run to distract everyone with. But there was one facet of the 78-79 season that gave the most minutest of shimmers. That was the manager, Jock Wallace, who had just taken Rangers to a treble up north, and he had somehow been acquired. Backs against the wall, the youth policy was almost an imperative, and the figurehead of this approach became hometown hero Gary Lineker. In the immediacy of the second division though, Wallace leaned on a man from over the Forth Bridge there, Alan Young. The effects were transformative, and isn't it funny that the TV cameras should suddenly appear when there's a whiff of a promotion chase?
Good try! Good goal! Coming up. In the corner, another goalkeeper gets correct.
Rota, May gets in there, and it looked to me as though Rota. Byrne will take the corner. O'Neill got the touch, and Smith scores the goal. Oh, yeah.
They were back up, and whilst another Scot was required to lead the line this time, Jim Melrose, it wasn't through a lack of victory as to why Leicester immediately plummeted back down into the second tier. In fact, their tally of 13 wins was more akin to a mid-table position, which they had become well acquainted with. No, it was their inability to scab points here and there, drawing just the 6 games, which was no good, especially in this, the last season of 2 points for a win. Not even the potential touted signing of a Johan Cruyff partway through the season would have salvaged the inadequacies that the Foxes were doomed to. And they would fall some way short upon their subsequent return to the second tier, 8th place and 5 points off the promotion pace set by Norwich City in 3rd. This despite the breakthrough of Lineker, who began to score at a rate of knots. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. There was always the promise of the FA Cup, even in the second tier.
It gets there, driven back by Peake, and that's 1-0, and the goalkeeper made a mistake, which...
And now going back in. O'Neill! Stirring stuff from the home team. And here's May. Hit Griffin. Oh, his back pass has gone in!
Played for Ardiles. Coming into Crooks!
Whilst it may feel like a comfortable route on paper, the key game had been won on the second day of the year, when a very strong Southampton side got rolled over at Filbert. In the end, the power of the Spurs Cup machine told at Villa Park. It would be the last big game of Jock Wallace's tenure in the East Midlands. Accepting a move back up north with Motherwell, now Leicester were in a tough place approaching their second season back in the second division. Gordon Milne was the man selected after a year out of work. He'd been taken under Joe Mercer's wing at Coventry City, and upon promotion to the manager's job, he managed to not only keep the club in the top flight as one of the smaller teams, but they had flourished. Now he was in for a whole different type of task. The football he got Leicester playing in the first half of the season was typical to his philosophy, with 4 or more goals stuck past teams like Carlisle, Derby, Burnley, Wolves and Cambridge. And yet with a February 19th loss at Grimsby, Leicester found themselves 6th in the league, but a massive 12 points away from 3rd and the final promotion spot. These inconsistencies, with as many losses as wins and not a whole lot of draws, a reason why only 6,000 souls showed up to Filbert Street 3 days later at home to Shrewsbury. They had no idea whatsoever what was about to follow.
Dodd could pull through to Line-X. Lovely goal from Steve Line-X.
McDonald. Now, Robert Jones scores!
15 matches remain, not a single one was lost. Going into the final day, Leicester had a profitable home game against relegated Burnley, and they led Fulham on goal difference. A fine time to drop your only second goalless draw of the season. Meanwhile, local rivals Derby were doing Leicester a solid, beating Fulham 1-0, a result of which would hold Fulham down in the second division, allowing the Foxes to roam 3 in the top flight. Only problem being that crowd trouble prompted the referee to blow up a minute early. The entire promotion was now at the mercy of a Football League decision. 4 days later, the Football League instated Derby's win, promoting Leicester City to the First Division.
Peak. 3 runners ahead of him. Oh, I say, what a cracking goal. Sims. Oh, yes! Wolf Rushton. Off on the Temple a few moments ago. And there's Peak. Oh, I say, he's done it again. Comes to Lineker. That's good play. And he got it. Smith's header, Alan Smith, and he scores.
A star had already been launched in the second tier. Gary Lineker mustered up 26 goals to win the Golden Boot before only being dwarfed by the indomitable Ian Rush for strikes in the top flight. At a club level, Leicester began the season horrifically. Their first win back in the big time postponed until October the 29th with a triumph over Howard Kendall's Everton. Just 2 points dropped and a waterlogged abandonment against Southampton had preceded it. Grim stuff until the turn of the year when Milne's attacking football started to reap the rewards and Leicester eventually wound up in 15th place. The subsequent campaign almost a mirror image, the same amount of goals scored, the same amount of points won, the same position in the table. The campaign probably encapsulated across 7 October days when Leicester got pumped 5-0 at Hillsborough, only to exact the same scoreline at home to Villa the following week. This time Lineker's 24 goals had him in with a share of the Golden Boot. Form like that, especially for a 15th place club, was never going to keep him at Filbert Street. That summer he was signed by league champions and cup winners, cup holders Everton. Now the goal-scoring onus laid on Alan Smith's shoulders.
The scorer this time is Mark Bright. But a nice little ball there, and the back pass by Moore. No! Smith against the post. Smith, no! Number 2. Venus left it. McAllister. That's a very good goal.
Alan Smith, who joins Arsenal tomorrow, his shot, but it was turned in by Alan McDonald.
Again, there were 2 identical campaigns to one another, as Alan Smith failed to live up to the goal-scoring prowess of his old strike partner. Such were the fine lines of Leicester City in the top flight. Their record of 54 scored, 76 conceded and 42 points was good enough for survival in the 85-86 season, but that exact same record didn't guarantee survival in 87. Things were in dire straits entering May 86 as Leicester entered the final day of the campaign in the relegation zone and with Newcastle the final visitors to Filbert Street. A win and hope at least one of the teams above them failed was required. Ali Moughlan and Ian Banks with the goals to uphold Leicester's end of the bargain as Ipswich were the ones faltering under the late springtime sunshine. The Foxes had gotten away with it. As a measure so that kind of season wouldn't happen again, Brian Hamilton was hired to be joint manager alongside Gordon Milne. Ask Roy Evans at Liverpool in '98 or Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes at Celtic in 2000 if it works. Spoiler, it doesn't. This time Leicester entered May with the advantage of being outside the drop zone and winnable fixtures against a Coventry team concerned with the Cup and an Oxford side in a similar bind were profitable. A draw against Coventry plunged Leicester into a familiar position in the relegation places come the final day's visit of Oxford United. Another win would do it. Instead, the U's held out and Leicester were sent down. They had to start all over again. Brian Hamilton's 6 months in sole charge of Leicester City had gone horribly wrong, so after failing to score across 3 straight league games against Bradford, Huddersfield and Middlesbrough, he was gone. In 16th place when the axe came tumbling down, it was an absolutely enormous coup to have acquired a certain David Pleat as his replacement. He had previous in taking little old Luton Town to the top flight and keeping them there, and he'd just come out of the Spurs job. Surely, if anybody could bring the Foxes up to scratch, it was him.
It off a superb afternoon for him. He slips the ball past Hodge. It's his first hat-trick for the club.
Again in the second half, Hull could have had 10. Palin said at Peyton, he doesn't miss that sort of a chance.
Leicester City had treaded water for far too long without making much of an imprint on English football. Then, Martin O'Neill showed up and reminded Filbert Street of its potential. Leicester City had believed they had found the right man for the job in David Pleat in late 1987, but all he could do was keep them with their heads afloat in the bottom half of the second division. It wasn't good enough, so in the last season before the Premier League was founded, he was sacked and in came Gordon Lee to steady the ship. Quite frankly, the Foxes could be grateful for the restructuring of the Football League into the Premier League because it meant that their eventual resting place of 22nd didn't mean relegation into the 3rd tier. That's just how bad that things had got. After a 20-game spell as caretaker manager, Gordon Lee was subbed out for Brian Little, formerly of Aston Villa for all his playing career, but his first permanent managerial job had seen him take Darlington from non-league to the 3rd tier in successive seasons. On the basis of that, he was hired.
It's by Colin Gibson as well, and Reece Wilmot has missed his kick completely. Gibson will punish him.
Wright, who shouldn't really have been able to get behind the Southend defence quite so easily.
Again he swings it across the heart of that area. James, he was unlucky. It's in the net. It's going to be a shot from Gibson. Oh, it's flown into the Bristol.
It was a nearly impeccable start to life as Leicester City manager for Brian Little, dropping just the 2 points away to Swindon Town, who might have been in the top flight had they not cooked their books. Quickly though, Little began to realise just how cursed this job was, shipping 3 in successive games at Middlesbrough and Barnsley before going down 5-1 to Cambridge United in September. So Leicester went into their penultimate game at Charlton with a 5-point lead with 2 games to play. Middlesbrough's game in hand meant that all the Foxes needed to do was win one of them. They wound up losing both, not even finishing 3rd, which spat them out into the lottery of the playoffs.
Coming in, it's taken short to Steve Thompson. It's a good chip. And here comes Russell. Great goal. In swinging corner, Dion Dublin moving towards the near post. Up goes Chappell and Heathcote. Good one. And it's Danny O'Shea on the last touch.
Again, it wasn't the best corner, but it's been forced in on the line. But all at sea at the moment as Grayson gets a great opportunity here for another. And it breaks to Thompson, yes! Grayson overlapping down his left. He's got Ormond Royd and Russell forward. Tries the shot, Russell! It's 3! And it's
from the keeper. It's headed on by Ormond Royd and a mistake by the defender. And it's right, and it's 4-0, and well.
And here it goes to Ormond Royd. It's 5.
Got a really vital penalty at Tranmere to lift Blackburn's season last month. Mike Newell against Carl Muggleton. They're on the way! Ticket from the back. Whitlow with the free kick. Mims has come for it, not got it. Chance for Grayson, deflected and away this time by Colin Hendry. 2 goal line clearances left on the clock. It's Mike Newell for the second time. Oh, beaten onto the post by Muggleton. The drama just never stops. It was here's a chance for Tommy Wright.
To coast past Cambridge only to fall in what was the club's first visit to Wembley in a quarter of a century. It was incredibly tough to take. On the face of it, you have to say that Leicester paid the price for their inconsistencies throughout the campaign and arguably didn't deserve to go up. But armed with that vital experience of losing at the National Stadium, the Foxes belatedly battled back. Yes, it was only after a late February defeat at the baseball ground in which Little's side finally got their act together.
Sun coming out now as Mills makes it on again, edge of the area. Lovely ball in, here comes Wall to goal! Ball finds Coatsworth here, inside the area, and Gary Coatsworth's got another one. Has some space now, and Oldfield smacks that one across, here comes Walsh! In off the post, and Steve Walsh takes the... Now, plenty of options here, this is a tremendous piece of work, and now Thompson will hit the shot in, it took a deflection, completely wrong-footed, and Phil Nixon.
In ninth with 16 matches remaining, they won 8 and drew 1 of their next 9, which not only planted them firmly in the playoff conversation, but gave them an outside shot at automatic promotion. Sadly, 3-0 defeats on the road at West Ham and Peterborough derailed that half-hearted pipe dream, and despite the threat of having their whole playoff campaign undermined by a 7-1 pumping at St James Park, Leicester finished 6 points inside of the playoffs, where they were matched with Portsmouth, who had only just missed out on automatic promotion to the Premier League by goal difference.
He's turned Simons well, and suddenly Portsmouth are in trouble again as Joachim goes through. Now what sort of cross can Daniel put in here? It's a good long one there towards McLaughlin. Chip in there by Thompson. And Oldfield, and it's gone in. And Leicester. Here's Thompson. Joachim alongside him, still with Thompson. It's a great goal. Oh, that's a good shot. A wonderful goal.
Players knew they had reached Wembley, but the job was still only half done.
Blank. Summerby whips it into Maskell. Well played. Hoddle. To Moncur. Good run by him, and now Maskell. They're ahead of him though. Moncur plays it back in again, and no offside. And Taylor has scored. Philpott's cross is an excellent one. Walsh is there. And Joachim Hill. And he curls it beautifully over to the far post. Philpott turning it back in again. Walsh goes up to the keeper, and it's in. Now he's got Joachim and looks for Thompson. And Thompson has equalised. Knocks it long for White. And White steals in and goes down, and it's a penalty.
I do feel that Kevin Ford should be more alert to that ball played through.
From the spot for Swindon. He scored!
You tell me, you're the experts. Supporting Leicester City in this time must have been quite the emotional rollercoaster. To return to Wembley 12 months after the last heartache, to go 3-0 down almost instantly to a team that was probably not as good as you, only to pull level and have the rug swept from under you by a penalty decision. It was difficult to see how any team would have the resolve to go again. But go again they quite clearly did, as they climbed to the top of Division 1 with a January win over Charlton. Now the league was obviously quite tight as 2 wins separated the top 10, so the Foxes' subsequent inconsistencies had Brian Little descending from hero to zero. An April the 26th win at Fratton Park kept them just about in the playoffs as the toils of a tough season took its toll on the division. Ending the campaign with 3 1-1 draws was enough for 4th and the playoffs once again. I think the cliche is third time lucky. Steve Walsh's desperately late winner at Wembley had finally seen the Foxes victorious at the grand old stadium for the first time ever in a meaningful capacity and got them into the Premier League. This in a time right on the precipice before the rampant riches and an improved influx of talent flooded the game. It was a perfect time to jump aboard what was a runaway train.
Possession. Fox. Oh, and Elliott is free coming in from the left. It nestles in for Robbie Elliott and the sub.
Vinnie Jones preparing to launch one of those missiles he calls a throw-in. He does get such distance on these long throws. It goes Harford, it's 1-1.
Is struggling. No surprise then when Chelsea got a third early in the second half. Peacock's pass releasing Spencer to score his second of the game.
In theory, yes. In practice, not quite so much. Brian Little had earned just 2 wins from his opening 14 Premier League games, and after slipping up again at home to mid-table Manchester City, they were in danger of dropping to the foot of the league. Little saw the writing on the wall return back to his footballing home of Villa Park, and 24 hours after his resignation, the Foxes won 2-1 at home to the mighty Arsenal. His successor, Mark McGee, who couldn't arrest the slide, only being able to double Leicester's win tally over the course of the next 24 matches. They were promptly relegated, only propped up by an even worse team in Ipswich Town. By the end of the year, McGee met the same fate, jumping to a West Midlands club in need before Christmas, just when Leicester were steeling themselves for a promotion push. In the playoffs and 1 point off the top of the table, whoever came in next would have the perfect platform for an immediate Premier League return.
Effort by Giorgio Kinkladze. Leicester unable to resist the magic of the midfield maestro and unable to cope with the Premiership side's all-round attacking strength on this occasion.
Alexander, on the ball in, it's not a bad one. Poole didn't quite get home, it's 1-0. The scorer, Tony Thorpe, his second goal of the season.
Despite an opening goal after 28 minutes from Ewan Roberts.
No, you're right, it isn't the football you imagine when you think of Martin O'Neill and Leicester City, is it? Scrabbling around looking for wins that never arrived at places like Grimsby, Millwall and Stoke, hardly the bastions of footballing utopias. Still, the first win O'Neill did manage to carve out was the sweetest possible one, away at the traitorous Mark McGee's Wolves. It was a result which left Leicester clinging on to a spot in the playoffs only on goal difference. The platform still remained there for a manager who had started his managerial life at Wycombe, looked to have earned his big break at Norwich, only for boardroom shenanigans to generate him a false start. The more the season wore on, the more Leicester grew into it.
And then book him later, we'll send him off. Claridge is through, chance to make it 2-0, he has! Oh, shoot for Heskey. Heskey's in, left foot, drills it across, Claridge scores! 2-1 it is, 61 minutes!
Taylor supervising the free kick. Oh, is it a come-over as well? But here is Taylor's kick. And it was a free header! And the goal!
Played, Ipswich moved into...
Does well to get that one in. And it's gone in! And it's it!
By April 13th and a draw at Tranmere, Leicester were on the outside looking in. It appeared as though the Foxes had missed their chance at the immediate return. Then they pushed themselves over the line. Oldham, Huddersfield, Birmingham all beaten at Filbert Street before a crucial 1-0 triumph at Watford leapfrogged them over Ipswich and into the top 6. There can be no doubt about it that O'Neill's manoeuvres in the transfer market had crept the club over the line. Neil Lennon had been purchased for midfield from Crewe. Joining him in the middle was Chelsea loanee Muzzy Izzet. Steve Claridge up front though would only grow more crucial as the playoffs kicked into gear.
I've got the best scoring record away from home in the division. It's they who won the attack first, with Heskey trying to get into a shooting position here. Getting the ball across the park. Parker has scored! Houghton. It's a good-looking ball through, and it's in! Glorious ball, sets him clear. That could be a penalty, it is! The kick. And a level! That could be the winner from Claridge. It is!
4 straight second-tier campaigns, 4 straight playoff campaigns and 4 straight Wembley visits, and now with this latest win, they had evened the scores up at 2-2, taking themselves back into the Premier League at the first time of asking. Just imagine what Martin O'Neill could do with a pre-season. He didn't wait long on the transfer front. Casey Keller, coming in to be the club's #1 from Millwall, is its loan turned permanent, and Ian Marshall, recruited from Ipswich before lower league talent in Steve Guppy and Matt Elliott, followed midway through the campaign. This time they wouldn't be such a pushover in the top flight.
Ball. Now then, can Claridge get in there? In comes the cross, Heskey's there!
Down to show his pace, Lennon herring into the centre, Claridge is there! And Leicester, who fitted very snugly into this match at White Hart Lane, have scored the first goal, but Steve
got to the ball. Here's Lennon. Chance here maybe for Leicester City. They got bodies up. Lennon going all the way. He's in. It's a goal. Yes! Heskey the scorer. Martin got. Grayson in a good position. Yes, Claridge.
Huge scalps were taken in Spurs, Leeds, Newcastle and the reigning League Cup champions Aston Villa. By the time the League Cup latter stages were reached at the end of November, Leicester had sheltered themselves in mid-table between Derby and West Ham. After sinking both Scarborough and York City in the first rounds of the League Cup, the 4th round triumph over Manchester United easily the turning point of the campaign. As each of Newcastle, Arsenal, Spurs and Villa all fell at the 4th round stage, the competition opened up. Leicester were lucky to be handed one of the 3 non-Premier League teams in Ipswich Town.
Here is Claridge. Now Robbins. Who's got the goal?
This is Marcus Gale. Oh, driven through Keller and Wimbledon are in front. Parker with a free kick. Towards Grayson, it's in. The final whistle has gone. It's Leicester City and Martin O'Neill who go to Wembley. The pre-season relegation favourites could end the season with a major trophy to their name.
Without winning one of their League Cup semi-final matches against Premier League Wimbledon, Simon Grayson's goal was enough to have the Foxes sneaking into a 5th Wembley game of the decade against Middlesbrough. Borough were newly promoted much like Leicester, but they had been expensively assembled to the tune of Juninho and Fabrizio Ravanelli. Still, it was to be an even game which pitted 2 mid-table clubs for the chance at a rare trophy.
Ravanelli tried to get it back to him. Juninho struggling his way through somehow. Ravanelli! He did well to make his cross, and Walsh is there again and heads it back. Heskey! Claridge! It's in, isn't it? It is!
He's tied in the kick-ins, but just got that air about him. But here he is, and he's done it!
3 successive draws after 90 minutes in the competition have taken Leicester up to Hillsborough, a venue not befitting a cup coronation and the last ever replayed major final in English football history. While Steve Claridge and Emile Heskey would gain the goal-scoring plaudits over the final, it was Pontus Karamark who was ultimately the unlikely hero, putting in man-marking performances on little Juninho, which essentially won the day. A strong end to the season, claiming 7 points from 9, earned the Foxes a first top-half finish in the top flight for 20 years. The sky was the limit.
Here's Guppy, courtesy of Heskey. That's a good cross from Guppy. Marshall!
Heskey inside the box. Heskey, chance to chip the ball in, across the face of goal, and he scored! Matt Elliott has got there inside the opening 2 minutes of the game.
The league simply carried on in the same vein. 8 points taken from the first 4 games against royalty of the English game in Villa, Liverpool, Arsenal and Manchester United. A strong start to the season, which also included wins over Spurs and Leeds, made up for the lack of cup run in this season. Firstly, there was a grim display on the East Coast at Blundell Park as Leicester bounced out in the 3rd round of their League Cup defence. Then their exit from the FA Cup was equally as meek, shipping another 3 goals to Crystal Palace, this time in the 4th round. A novelty arrived in September, only a second ever European qualification, and one which was actually achieved by winning a trophy this time.
By Leicester, that's towards the far post again. There's Walsh in with a must goal. He's done it, Marshall. Ian Marshall puts Leicester ahead in exactly 11 and a half minutes, and oh dear. They try to play the 1-2, and that was just then, yes. Juninho. Sorry, if I'd have thought it was a proper. And there it goes.
Ladine making tracks into the box as well. In goes Ladine. A chance, and it's blasted in by Juninho. Here's Cano. Jose Marie. Oh, that's a great ball in. Swept it by Kiko. And that knows.
So if you know your Leicester history or watched the previous video that we did, that makes it 2 European campaigns and bizarrely 2 exits at the hands of Atletico Madrid, a team who by the late 90s weren't even a giant at the continental game. Still, by every other metric in the league, Leicester had shown themselves to have improved. They finished with 6 more points, they won 1 more game, scored more, conceded less, and had a goal differential that ranked as the best outside of the top 5. It was only the position that lagged 1 behind because of a better quality of division. The team had been improved to the tune of Robbie Savage and Theo Zagarakis in midfield. Experience was added up top in Tony Cottee as defensive reinforcements followed into the 98-99 campaign. Own goal aficionado Frank Sinclair as well as Jerry Taggart.
Lovely piece of control. He's got 3 Leeds men round him. It's a great run from Heskey. It's a lovely finish, and it's Tony Cottee. 76 minutes.
Impey. Going to go all the way through to Ian Marshall, who has surely won it for Leicester in injury time.
The position in the table was another 10th place. If you're keeping track at home, that's 3 top half finishers on the bounce. This is something that hadn't happened to the club since the 1920s. It just didn't happen to Leicester. If an opening day draw that ought to have been a win against eventual treble winners Manchester United was not good enough, then have the by now biannual triumphs over Leeds, Spurs and Liverpool, and whilst Coventry City did have the Foxes' number in the FA Cup, the same wouldn't be said for the League Cup.
And he's picked out Heskey, and they are coasting into the next round.
And then again, is it? Chance for Mazzi, is it? And Cottee, it's number 2. Martin. Parker with the kick. Parker with the goal. 3-4 in the box now, Leicester. It's Lennon. And Cottee with a brilliant goal to Savage. Turned forward by Lennon. It's a great ball. It's a goal. He's done it again.
If Wembley was a second home for the Merseyside clubs in the 80s and Manchester United frequented the grand old ground lot in the 90s, Leicester weren't that far off themselves. Once Chesterfield were put out of the League Cup, the Foxes were made to work for their Wembley showing. It was all top flight right the way through, and even when it wasn't, Sunderland in the semi-finals, they would go on to post 105 points in the second tier anyway, so were clearly of Premier League quality. Again, Leicester weren't supposed to be doing this, so no wonder that Martin O'Neill was a man in high demand. Everton and Leeds had chased and chased him, but at the 11th hour he made his decision known after a desperate campaign in October against Spurs to make him stay. Spurs, ironically enough, the team waiting for him and Leicester at Wembley.
They could have one, if not both players, in trouble.
Well, Savage will get a booking, I think, maybe for his tackle, but it's what the referee saw.
Yellow for Savage and red for Edinburgh. Good ball there for Everson, and he's got the pace to get in ahead of Walsh and keep going. And Keller, and it's a goal! Would you believe it? In stoppage time!
It was by now a rare blot in the Wembley copybook for Leicester City and Martin O'Neill as Spurs swept to the Alan Hardacre trophy in the last minute. It was a team that didn't need much, if any, money spending on it, as Tim Flowers came in as another goalkeeping option inexpensively. Now, usually in modern football, which you can say it is now thanks to the year starting with a 2, a team usually has a peak of 3 or 4 years. This was O'Neill's 4th. Again though, they improved.
Without necessarily getting their just rewards, at the Riverside Stadium everything came together. The side narrowly beaten by West Ham.
Cottee lurking right in the goal mouth. Flicked on by Sinclair, and that's a second goal for Jerry Taggart.
But once again it failed to tell the whole story, as the Foxes finished 8th, a Premier League high for the club and a record equaling 4th consecutive top half finish. Outside of winning the league, it was hard to see just how Leicester could improve, and Leicester winning the league, well, that was never going to happen, was it? Once again, it was typical that it was the League Cup that enhanced City's season, and in Emile Heskey's final days, his record £11 million transfer to Liverpool would only be completed after the final.
So it's Oakes against Digby. Corey slides it in the corner.
Pops up everywhere, Muzzy, is it? Good ball into Heskey!
Jeff Horsfield must score for Paul Bracewell, or Fulham's dream is over. Horsfield! Oh, Beckstad saves!
Savage again. Only Elliott in the box for Leicester, but he has a real presence. Oh! It's a super goal! Stop Paul Durket's watch. We've played 3 minutes of stoppage time, and it's Wembley again for Leicester City. Heskey is on the near post. Here's Elliott! Crossbar in! Batting edge trap here. Can they find one here? Good time by Jones. It's Kelly! Oh, there's the answer. David Kelly! Chapman Rovers. Guppy now with a corner. It's Elliott! And they're back in front.
From Batman to The Undertaker, every great story needs a compelling origin tale. Leicester City's championship winning season is no different. From the yo-yo years of the early 21st century to the third tier embarrassment, and finally to Nigel Pearson, this is a story behind the story of Leicester's title winners.
The Sky Bet Football League trophy. They are the champions for the 2013-14 season.
Leicester City had been able to persuade Martin O'Neill to stay at the club in the latter weeks of 1998. 18 months later, after 2 more League Cup finals and 2 more top half finishes, they were not so fortunate as he fled north to Celtic. The next 5 years couldn't have gone in more different directions for O'Neill and Leicester. Whilst the manager had reached a European final, won domestic trebles and dominated the SPL, Leicester were scraping the bottom of the barrel. In hindsight, the malaise began instantly with a decision to replace Martin O'Neill, a peak-age football manager, with one who just wasn't. Peter Taylor was hired, and if that wasn't a downgrade to make your head spin, the transfer market would do so for Leicester supporters in what were the final years at Filbert Street. Emile Heskey was already long gone and starring in a cup treble for Liverpool. His replacement, goal machine himself, Adi Akinbaye. The midfield was completely gutted out as both Theo Zagorakis and Neil Lennon left in the summer, as did the vast experience of Steve Walsh and Tony Cottee. The replacements, they just weren't up to it. Gary Rowett, anyone? Callum Davidson, Richard Creswell, here's one, Trevor Benjamin, Dean Sturridge. Alright, I'm taking the piss here, but then you had the start to the season, the like of which Leicester City had just never seen before.
A bit of history. It was also his first Premiership goal since his £3 million move from Norwich. £5 million striker, and Akinbaye's first goal for the club came after 55 minutes of the game. Multinational millionaires at Stamford Bridge was just as daunting. It was Chelsea's first game since the departure of their... It inspired Red Star, who forced City back and started creating...
In an age of peak Manchester United and Arsenal going at each other's throats, Leicester City were the ones leading the league table as we heralded October 2000's arrival. And whilst their unbeaten run obviously would fade with the challenges of Man United and Liverpool, Leicester still turned out regular victories, and against big teams too, like Leeds United, who were enjoying a heyday. Third on Christmas Day, level with Arsenal, as United coasted to a third championship on the spin. Leicester's arse fell out of the season, beginning with 6 of the best at Highbury before only 13 points from their final 19 games. Not even the weird loan signing of Roberto Mancini could save them now. It meant a first bottom half finish since their promotion to the Premier League back in '96. The following campaign, yeah, it could have started better.
Years to return to the top flight, Bolton wasted no time announcing their arrival. Leicester blown away in an amazing first half at Filbert Street. Encouraged by that, Bolton mounted attack after attack. Michael Ricketts ploughed through Gary Rowett's challenge better than Wanderers had dared to hope. But it was the Leicester defence in dreamland, as no Franson had been an inspiration in midfield. And the goal he deserved came on the stroke of half-time. But not much else changed. The home team still dismal, and another Franson free kick with 8 minutes.
As I produce this video, there's a lot of conclusions being jumped to in the early part of a season off the back of scant evidence, but it was clear just 90 minutes into the 01-02 season that Leicester just weren't going to amount to anything. They'd already binned off 3 of their big signings from the prior season in Sturridge, Rowett and Akinbaye, whilst also selling off Steve Guppy to Martin O'Neill up north. The incomings continue to flummox as Dennis Wise, Ian Walker and James Scowcroft were the big names through the door that summer. After 5 goals were shipped to Bolton, which was followed by just 6 points from their first 11, Leicester were in big trouble. This the last campaign before the big old move to the Walker Stadium. Leicester had their 3rd manager in the revolving hot seat by October the 10th when Dave Bassett took over. Bassett made Leicester hard to beat at first, then 2002 arrived like a freight train and kept the Foxes rooted to the dirt of the relegation zone. Just 1 win from December 1st onwards was form that'd even get you relegated in these heady days of 2025 from the top flight. Ultimately, 28 points required, a heavy 12 points off the 40, which had been enough to keep Sunderland up in 17th place. Mickey Adams had been in place as a club's manager since April, earning a promotion from assistant to manager. In foreshadowing to a more modern, colder footballing world, Leicester managed to recoup enough money from a single sale, that being Matt Piper, whilst not needing to refresh their squad, whilst so obviously being a cut above the rest of the division.
Dickoff finds Scowcroft. Scowcroft! Oh, finds the net! Lost his feet momentarily. Dickoff! 1-0! To take the free kick, he's picked out Paul Dickoff! Clever header! Walker can't get there!
Eventually, Portsmouth, Leicester and Wolves were promoted. If you told someone in the summer of 03 that 2 of these clubs would immediately go back down and the other would have a fruitful time of it for the next 8 years, you'd have banked money on that club being Leicester. The plan appeared obvious, fill the team with experienced names to weather the Premier League storm. In came Les Ferdinand, Keith Gillespie, Steve Guppy had another crack at the East Midlands, while Steve Howe and Ricardo Scamacca also arrived.
Corner kick. And Ferdinand again with a header! Actually again perhaps. Wolves can't clear. Shimika's shot! There's an opportunity here perhaps. And it goes low, it goes, and the shot is in! Important. And he's done it! And it goes. Heads up! Oh, it's there!
After an unbeaten November, it appeared that Leicester might just hold their own this time. 3 wins in that month became 2 wins for the rest of the season. All 3 relegated clubs have been cut adrift for a long old time. On this occasion, Leicester would not be so quick to return.
Prodigious throw, and it's gone in! Jody Morris will claim it!
Followed by 5 steps back, and a 2-0 home defeat by Reading.
Harper drove it low, and a brilliant goal from Dave Grammer!
The 04-05 season was a fucking mess. Mickey Adams was gone by October, his old boss Dave Bassett parachuted in before the grand reveal of Craig Levein and 15th place in what was now called the Championship.
The Foxes had the better of it, and Ian Hume struck the opening goal in the first half to wait. But Reading dug out a result. 5 minutes from time, James Harper's corner was flicked on by Ivar Ingemarson, and
campaign after even more dreariness followed as Craig Levein just about managed one go around the sun, only to leave in January 06 for Rob Kelly. Anyone remember him? No, didn't think so.
To score his first of the game.
This was supposed to be a whole new era for Leicester. Shiny new stadium, more money coming into the club, and a new set of eyeballs via the Premier League. Instead, they were finishing 19th in the Championship. New chairman Milan Mandaric sacked Rob Kelly. Anyone remember him yet? Nope, didn't think so. Just 6 weeks after becoming involved with the club.
Driven in by Elliot Ward. Has best completed a very good day's work for the new boss.
And finally, the wheel of fortune derailed with one of the all-time shoot-yourselves-in-the-foot seasons. Martin Allen was hired, but then instantly ran into Milan Mandaric-shaped problems when he wouldn't sign the ill-fitting forwards for the team. Gary Megson was seen as a steady hand, hired in September, lasting 41 days. Ian Holloway was next, and he turned a team who had been hard to beat but not prolific in terms of victories into one that was being routinely beaten, transforming another mundane bottom half season into one of relegation. Leicester City hadn't given manager a full season in the job for ages, and now with this scorched earth lunatic as chairman, they found themselves in the third tier for the first time ever. They called it free fall. Nigel Pearson, a man who would crawl shirtless through broken glass to cut off his nipples just to get 3 points on a Saturday. This one was going to be over by September, or it was going to flourish. He had spent his post-playing career largely as a number 2, working underneath such luminaries as Glenn Roeder, Stuart Pearce and Brian Robson, invaluable Premier League experience. His recent managerial exploits had seen him drag Southampton out of the mire, at Leicester City's expense no less. No prizes for seeing the inspiration for his acquisition at what was still the Walkers Stadium.
It is Pulp Fiction.
It's Bryant. Well, Dye takes it quickly. Here's Oakley. And finished off by Howard.
Here. This is Oakley. Great goal from...
For August.
Eva Mendes. Nice.
It was an indomitable August that earned Pearson Manager of the Month. If my assumption was to be held as gospel, this would be a re-flourishing of Leicester City. The manager surrounded himself with people he knew best, reuniting with assistant Craig Shakespeare and Steve Walsh, not the former Leicester player there. Whilst the loss at home to Millwall was a hiccup, and the whole month of October pretty much, Pearson's Leicester went on to the League One warpath for the remainder of the campaign.
2 comes to Bryant. Good stop. Will it go in? Will it go in? Yes, it will.
Batman.
But he continues and plays it through to Brian, who takes it in his stride. And gives...
I don't know, I'm always saying mate. All right, mate.
Dyer lets it run nicely and finds the net to give Leicester the lead.
Lloyd Dyer.
Hey, Dyer again. Andy King, what a goal!
I think the Goodfellas, yeah.
Great stuff again from Davis. Back to Howard for Leicester. 1-0.
Clay pigeon shooting.
Little chip towards Andy King. Oh, it's a terrific goal.
I like the smell of coffee. Fresh coffee.
Into the left foot and floated in, and Steve Howard.
It's Hong Kong Fu. Is he a superhero?
For defence, Leicester could be in here. Howard, yes.
Thanks for your support in 08-09, and keep it going through the championship season, and I'm sure one day we'll get back into the Prem. Ciao.
Promotion was secured with an April win at Southend, and with a club record points tally of 96, they were slingshot back into the second tier, now with all the momentum in the world. Pearson continued to update his coaching staff, adding former Charlton and England defender Chris Powell to the ranks. Meanwhile, Martin Wagon would be added on loan from Sunderland and wound up top scoring for the Foxes in the Championship. The longest unbeaten home form in the country ended in September against Preston, but it would be the Foxes' run at the Walker Stadium which kept them in the hunt for the playoffs the more the season wore on.
Took a real hit there. The referee's way play on because Bryant has it, and it
Flag stays down. And Gesson here for Leicester. Small finish. Leicester take the lead.
Since a win on the Sunshine Coast of Blackpool in February, Leicester had occupied a playoff spot, and whilst form wouldn't always be as rosy as painted in Pearson's Manager of the Month for February, they entered the playoffs with the best form in the division. A losing streak as March became April was quickly packed away and transformed into 5 won on the spin as the Foxes confirmed 5th with wins over Watford, Preston and Middlesbrough. It meant Cardiff in the playoffs and a chance at a first trip to a new Wembley Stadium.
The cluster of 5 yellow shirts in that box. Whittingham! Oh, it's brilliant! Peter Whittingham! Oh, it's come Chopra! Howard, oh, it's on to Bryant! And he trickles in! Just a bit back. Here's Howard. That's deflected, that's it! That's into the danger area. Oh, that's brilliant!
Bruce thinks the goalkeeper's there. Chopra nips in, and Alex Bruce
Peter Whittingham scores! That's up for the East Midlanders.
That marked the end of Nigel Pearson at Leicester. Having been invited by Milan Mandaric to the Cardiff City Stadium second leg, Paulo Sousa took over the management of the club, whilst Pearson was allowed to talk to the recently relegated Hull. What had been building towards something pretty special at the Walkers was now in danger of being derailed.
Lee gets the touch, what a chance!
Graham Alexander with a chance to make it 3-0, and Burnley's shoots, kicking his way through, it's Michael Brown! Can he find the finish? Yes, he can! Julian. And he wasn't looking at goal, but he's found it!
Paulo Sousa, a Champions League winner in his playing days, won just one game before being sacked at the start of October. From playoff hopefuls to propping up the division, the onset of spooky season prompted Mandaric to change the course of the club forever. Sven-Göran Eriksson was the next man tasked with steering Leicester City, and the brief was now to avoid relegation back to League One. The club's form instantly took a turn for the better.
Now, Wellens, who started the game promisingly, lovely ball in, and crashed.
Gallagher again to try and deliver something. The header is off the line. Morrison with it.
He's in, surely.
Waiting to bounce. Yakubu making another glimpse of goal here. That is terrific.
In the midst of a run that had earned Leicester City 22 points from 8 matches and their dredging from the bottom half and back into the playoff picture, the club was taken over by Vichai Srihaddhanaprabha. However, only 4 wins from their remaining 16 matches stunted the club to 10th. Vichai had a dream, but it did not include being sat about in mid-table of the second tier of English football. So after a 3-0 home defeat to Millwall left the club in a middling 13th position in late October 2011, Vichai pulled the trigger. Sven was gone. Meet the new manager, same as the old one. Nigel Pearson was back at the Walkers. Now it's called the King Power. What he found there was the beginning of a new dawn in the East Midlands. Names like Kasper Schmeichel, Paul Konchesky, David Nugent had started to be acquired ahead of the new campaign. That winter, 2 more key names were added for a combined £2 million. Danny Drinkwater and Wes Morgan. I'm not going to try use the word bargain over the next 5 or so minutes this video still got left to run.
Come to David Nugent. Nugent will shoot, and Nugent will score. A spectacular.
Now he turns, and now he finishes. Emphatic.
Well, Dyer knows he's got the beating of Green. Tees it up for Dance. 1-0.
Pearson stabilised the club into 9th place in what could be excused as a manager being dropped into an unideal situation partway through a season. That summer, few waves were made, with probably more column inches applied to the loan market of youngsters with potential in Harry Kane, Jesse Lingard and Michael Keane. Anthony Knocker and in January Chris Wood were probably the standout permanent signings, bargains, whilst Richie Delat and Matty James would also become useful. Then there's the acquisition of some non-league striker, I think he goes by the name of Jamie Vardy. Hope he becomes important soon. Also, you could argue that the signing of James Pearson, I wonder how they negotiated that particular fucking deal, would become to be equally as important as Vardy's signature. For very different reasons, unmonetisable reasons.
He was added again today, 5 minutes later.
After a slow start, this were more like it. A club who could be inconsistent on their day but could have 5 or 6 weeks of obliterating all competition in sight. It's this kind of form that took Leicester into the automatics come February 2013 as Pearson cuddled onto that Manager of the Month trophy in bed, presumably. The back nine of the campaign was a bit of a nightmare though, with a win needed on the final day at the City Ground of all places to keep the Foxes in the hunt for a playoff spot. In the end, Leicester survived by goal difference effectively based on good, solid defensive football, the numbers of which only champions Cardiff and fellow playoff team Brighton could better. And with their spot in 6th place, Leicester were paired off with Watford in the playoffs, and yeah, pretty much everyone underneath the sun has seen the conclusion to this one. Leicester fans, look away, you've been warned. For everything that would be said about that chaotic ending, Watford wound up in the same position as Leicester come the end. They weren't going up to the Premier League either, and when Leicester thrashed Watford upon their Vicarage Road return to begin November, it was clear to see that the Foxes were on the charge again. Occupying the automatics with Burnley, there had been opening up a 10-point gap to Watford, who resided just shy of the playoff spots. Only then did Leicester exert their true force.
Taylor Fletcher against Ford, Nugent.
Injuries recently. Here's Moore. Here's Phillips. He leaves it to Nugent. It's Nugent, and Leicester City have their goal.
Form after Christmas blew away all competition as Leicester confirmed promotion with a home win over Sheffield Wednesday on April the 4th. By this point, the Foxes had still yet to be beaten since early December. That January, however, Leicester chanced a look at Riyad Mahrez while scouting somebody else. Mahrez, who believed Leicester to be a rugby club, signed for 450 grand anyway. The rest goes down as history. 102 points the tally come the end of the campaign, another club record bulldozed down by Pearson, and even in a world of parachute payments, it was a commanding statement that said that Leicester might just be alright in the top flight. Key experience would be added to the squad in the form of Matty Upson and none other than Esteban Cambiasso. Big money also spunked out on Leonardo Joa and Andre Kramaric, but it would be the more inexpensive names, Mark Albrighton, Robert Hoof, Danny Simpson, who cost just £2 million between them, who would become the real club legends.
Oh, might break for King, surely well for one! Face to face with Flamini, aimed at Ochoa! And there's
So far so good, even if we didn't know the extent of just how shambolic Man United were and just how much the FA Cups were masking a bigger problem over at Arsenal. It still meant a 7th place after 5 games with only 1 defeat, and that was away to the eventual champions Chelsea. Then the honeymoon violently cancelled, thrown down the toilet, and Leicester boarded a flight back to reality. 2 points from their next 13 matches condemned them to the dreaded tag of bottom by Christmas. Only 2 clubs had survived from this position before. Let's analyse that one. There had been 22 Premier League seasons and only twice had the bottom club on Christmas Day survived. The first of which, West Brom in 04, who had 10 points after playing 1 more game than Leicester had, but had 1 fewer point to make up in order to survive. The second happened just 12 months before this attempt by Leicester, this time being Sunderland, who again had 10 points but with only 4 points to make up. Therefore, Leicester were entering uncharted territory in terms of their recovery. Brief respite meant scraping wins over the similarly doomed clubs in Hull and Aston Villa, whilst a trip to Anfield was a profitable one. Still bottom, they had nearly halved their deficit. Was it the beginning of a revival? Not quite. Entering April, Leicester could quite easily have been doomed to relegation, picking up 2 points from the next 5 games after what had been a superb start to 2015. Instead, they found themselves no further away from their goal than they had done at Christmas in reality. 7 points was the headline figure, but the Foxes still had a game in hand, and in truth, they had never truly been dominated. They'd also added to the team Robert Hoof coming in on loan, and once the international break was over, Leicester welcomed West Ham to the King Power. Things changed.
Cannoned off, Collins, Cambiasso!
Vardy with Nugent in support, this is Jamie Vardy!
Let's a good look. But his look was not in, Leicester's was. That's all Brighton, and that could be an own goal!
If you don't know the answer to that question, then I think you are an ostrich.
A back three was deployed and Leicester kept winning and winning and winning, 4 in a row. Never before in Premier League history had the Foxes done that, not even in Martin O'Neill's age. In fact, you'd have to go back to September and October of 1966 for the last time Leicester City had won 4 top-flight league games in a row. Their latest win at Turf Moor against Burnley had not only significantly weakened a relegation rival, but it had dredged Leicester out of the drop zone for the first time in months. Fate was in their hands despite Sunderland's game in hand as they travelled up to the Stadium of Light in the penultimate weekend.
From Reed and Davis, superbly played, what a magnificent goal!
Finisce qui, il Leicester City è salvo, per il Sunderland invece ci sarà ancora da soffrire.
Struggles put one in, and no Brighton.
Since Luton Town took to Wembley for the Cup final in 1959, they had done typical Luton Town things, from Division 1 to 4 and back to the top flight for a single season. Then David Pleat picked them up and engineered the Kenilworth Road glory days. We've got a lot of Luton history to speed through. Here goes. September 1880, football comes to Luton in the form of Luton Wanderers. 5 years later, Luton Town is formed and they play their football at Dallow Lane. In 1896, they finally take the plunge, resigning from the Southern League to apply for the second division. The Football League elects Blackpool, Walsall and Gainsborough Trinity instead, a sign of things to come for the young club. After bouncing between the United League and Southern League, finally Luton venture into the promised land known as the Football League and the third division in 1920. For the first time, they ditch the light blue and move into their now familiar black and white. Between wars, like many, Luton lived hand to mouth, essentially underpinning the club's finances on boxing and wrestling tournaments. But finally, in 1933, they got there on sporting merit, appearing in the FA Cup quarter-final, eventually knocked out by the team of their day, Dixie Dean's Everton. An easier way to make money was realised 2 years later when Luton flogged the family silver, recouping almost £5,000 for star players Bill Brown and Sam Bell. Safe to say the supporters preferred the cup run method of raising money. After dwelling in the third division south for 17 years like some kind of sweaty goblin, Luton finally earned promotion with a win over Torquay United on May the 1st, 1937. Modern day supporters of the club would be surprised to learn that the club then spent another 18 years in Division 2. These periods of stable generations in the same division would not last long. By 1955 they were in the top flight, and within 3 years they were in the top end of the first division, a record finish of 8th, almost a disappointment after a late season collapse. The following year, however, would be Luton Town's first day in the footballing sun.
And there was something new to watch before the match. Keep Fit girls from Coventry giving a demonstration on how to keep fit. This year's cup final was honoured by the presence of Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip. Wing to put in a beautiful centre, and Roy Dwight's kick was a crackerjack. Did again. A centre from Billy Gray, and slow motion shows how Tom Wilson used his head to beat Roy Bainman. Then the ball came to David Pacey, who scored. The Hatters, of course, went mad. And the rest of the match was packed with thrills.
Luton Town had their day out at Wembley. Their talisman Sid Owen had just won the Footballer of the Year award. Sky was the limit, right? Wrong. They had a bunch of old lads that they just could not replenish. Case in point, Sid Owen retired after that cup final. By 1965, Luton were in the 4th division. By 74, they were back in the 1st division. So you see, this Luton Town disease really isn't a new phenomenon. They pogo stick their way up and down the English pyramid with enough force to give Buzz Lightyear vertigo, all the while they attempted to leave Kenilworth Road. Again, not new phenomena. I haven't really mentioned any players so far, but it's best to break from that to pay respect for the 1964 acquisition of David Pleat from Nottingham Forest. He'd played less than 100 games for the club before pottering around provincial clubs before returning to the coaching staff in '74, by which point the club was in the top flight once again.
That was Smith.
Getting down there into a marvellous position and a powerful cross for Hankins to get up there. It's not the simplest of goals in.
No, you're right, it was not going well at all for them. Before their final game prior to Christmas, the club had only 9 points from 21 outings to rub together. A record almost bad enough to make this modern world of parachute payments blush. And yet 10 wins from their second half of the season left the greatest of the great escapes on. With their season over, they were out of the drop zone, but the danger was not over yet. Many Luton fans turned up in their droves to White Hart Lane in the hope that relegation rival Spurs would lose at home to Leeds. They didn't, and Luton were down. It was only the work of manager Harry Haslam that kept Luton from leaning on the old familiar pogo sticking up and down the divisions like some kind of deranged mutant rabbit. Faced with managing a club that had just announced debts of $343,000, he stripped the club back to its fundamentals, and still he managed to steer the club to 2 top 7 finishes. By January 1978, however, he announced his departure. Few could blame him for all the work he had done, first in getting the club to the top flight, and more importantly, keeping the club's head above water after their inevitable relegation. The question now, was the next manager up to it? Seeing that name flash up before you on your dirty little screen, you probably already know the answer. Within 4 years, David Pleat had gained back-to-back promotions, from reserve team coach to chief coach, and now he was the manager. You could say that made him perfect for the Mad Hatters. Having turned just 32, he had a whole dressing room to win over, many of which were older than him. Ultimately, under his watch, he took the club from 7th to 13th as the best placed of 7 teams on 38 points, meaning it wasn't all that safe a season as the positioning says. Tough decisions needed to be made. That included selling the Futcher brothers for a combined £450,000, and that created an almost new team from scratch. The highlight of this new team comfortably being the £15,000 signing of Mal Donaghy from Northern Ireland. Whilst Luton regressed by just 2 points and finished closer in position to the drop zone in their 1978-79 campaign, they were somehow further away from the relegation points-wise, quirkily with a positive goal difference which showed just how Jekyll and Hyde they were on their travels compared to at home. They had survival as well as a run to the League Cup quarter-final to show for the season, as David Pleat repeated the promise that the club would need 3 years to be stabilised. We were just about to enter that 3rd year. Armed with a new managing director, John Smith, the club became more ambitious on other fronts, being one of the first to welcome a new dawn of shirt sponsorship ahead of the 1979-80 season. Oh, and the players came in by the bucket load. 200 grand spaffed on Mansfield Mike Saxby, 150 grand via tribunal for Orient's Tony Grealish. It was an incredible start to the season that bled well into the 1980s.
Monster kick, a tricky one.
That latest win had Luton Town entering the official threshold of business end of the season, within the promotion spots and even with a game in hand that could take them top. Now 20,000 were being pulled into Kenilworth Road thanks to the entertaining and successful football. Once the heat arrived, Luton melted. Away from home, they could no longer find a win, going down to defeats at Sunderland and Swansea, while struggling in front of their own fans, being held to points against West Ham and Burnley. They wouldn't win a game between February 16th and April 4th, with promotion now in the toilet. The difference was just 4 points and 3 places, their 16 wins comfortably the lowest of the top 7, as they recorded fewer defeats than the promoted Birmingham City. The summer of 1980 was a less dramatic one by Luton's transfer standards, Radi Antic coming in, whilst their biggest expenditure came in the form of attaining a safety certificate at 200 grand. Unlike the prior campaign, this one began slowly and then ramped up into the new year. Before David Pleat and his men pitched up at Cambridge, Luton were squelching about dangerously close to the West Country Deadmen which propped up the division. By the time fireworks went off signifying the arrival of 1981, Luton were just a win away from the promised promotion that a top 3 spot would deliver. Unfortunately, the difference between promotion and another year in Div 2 was the needlessly bad home form that generated just 2 home victories before April. Still, 2 points was the difference and Luton were getting warmer to the fires of the First Division. Pleat was brave in the market that summer, selling local boy Paul Price to Spurs for $250,000 and daringly swapping Tony Grealish for the ageing Brian Horton. It was supposed to be a mistake. In the end, he clicked everything into gear. With Horton placed as a midfield fulcrum, it freed up Ricky Hill to venture further up the field alongside Brian Stein. Safe in the knowledge of a now adept fullback pairing of Kirk Stevens and Mark Hazelwood, as well as Jake Findlay between the sticks, Luton were ready for a promotion assault.
Looking for the one long pass before forwards, and here's another one for White, who's onside and scores. White puts it through.
There's flying out the blocks, and then there's whatever Luton were doing at the start of the 81-82 campaign. Charlton battered at home on the opening weekend. QPR and Bolton sworn off to start September. A win at Leicester, both Watford and Orient pulverised before 6 of the best at home to Grimsby Town. By the time the club lost its 3rd league game of the season on November the 21st, they commanded an 8-point lead over 4th place. Even now, in a world of 3 points for a win, it was a comprehensive stranglehold over the division. The one low point thus far was the premature end to Mike Saxby's playing career, his knee buckling in a 1-0 win on Halloween at home to Crystal Palace. His replacement would be nurtured through the system, not bought, and that man's name was Clive Goodyear. Ultimately, the loss up at Newcastle United turned out to be a mere blip as Luton lost only once more in the league all season, a typically madcap 4-3 defeat in Yorkshire against Barnsley.
Andy Smith to Cartwright. Oh, it's a bad one, straight to Turner. Beaten by Goodyear. Here comes Luton again. Ankic. To Hill. That's a good cross towards Keane.
The season wasn't even allowed to enter May in the final 4 fixtures, and Luton were a win away from the big time. Top met second bottom, the result a mere formality as the Hatters swept 4 beyond Shrewsbury Town to earn promotion after 7 seasons. David Pleat had to be brave in the transfer market, and that meant the tough decision of including his top scorer Steve White in a deal with Charlton Athletic for their heavily coveted signature of Paul Walsh. The new young forward more than settled into the team as Luton's brand of swashbuckling football only intensified with the increase in the opposition's quality.
Going again, but that was Goodyear.
And Stein is in the clear. Against Grobbelaar, he's round him. And Alan Kennedy can't keep it out.
Good turn from Hill. Finds Stein again. Still Stein. Well, would you credit him?
It was football from a different planet, not impeccably entertaining and perfect like a Dutch total football or an early Pep Guardiola team, but just simply put, mad. A 3-2 win at Birmingham in October placed Luton into the dizzying heights of 8th, 7 points off the pace. It was a peak as the honeymoon soon went off the rails. With a mix of the novelty being snuffed out, Brian Stein breaking his foot and the cruel marathon of quality opposition every week, the only 4s and 5s being scored were against Pleat's team now. The latest of which, suffered at Vicarage Road against Watford, placed the Hatters within the drop zone alongside 2 other teams on 34 points. After 4 straight defeats, relegation now appeared inevitable. Then the fight back. Unbeaten in 6, Pleat's side took 12 points with victory over both second city teams and at home to Swansea before digging in on the road against Notts County and Southampton. Going down to Everton and Manchester City, however, plucked them from their seemingly safe place of 17th and swallowed them down into the relegation zone. A point behind both Birmingham and Manchester City, it was the latter who they travelled up to meet on May 14th for a relegation shootout. Only a win would do.
And Stein again. And he gets the cross in. And Williams has come. And Tish! Oh, it's there! They've done it! Bloody Tish!
Luton, a team that had gone from Division 1 to 4 and back up to 1 in 23 years, whilst Manchester City enjoyed a golden age of cups and a league title, and they had relegated their opponents. Then, seemingly with all the goodwill in the world, it would not be Luton Town without a spanner chucked into the works. That summer, after such an incredible feel-good season, the club made inquiries about ripping the club out of Luton and taking it to Milton Keynes. After an intense summer of relocation, redevelopment and ownership buyout, a sigh of relief could be heard when Luton ran out onto the Highbury turf to start the new season. Only Les Sealey had been acquired, taking over from Jake Findlay in net, not that the low turnover in playing staff appeared to matter. After Leicester had fallen, Wolves were slapped by Thorpe. Wolves, a team who had graced Wembley not that long ago. Then the more impressive of victories, 1-0 against Villa, which we've just shown you, which was quickly followed by triumphs over Everton and Southampton, some of the finest teams of their day. A 6-0 loss at Anfield came next, but the true barometer of just how Luton had improved was their resilience, rebounding from that with a gritty 1-0 win at QPR, which put Pleat's side within the top 4 on bonfire night. By Boxing Day, and after rattling off 4 wins from 5, Luton was still in the mix, with teams like Liverpool and Man United sitting third with 19 matches played. It was truly fairy tale stuff. Then the 1984 reality check, long-term injuries mixed with a rotten bit of form served to pluck Luton from the moon and push them down into the dirt. The club had won just 16 points from their final 23 matches, plummeting them down into 16th. David Pleat could be forgiven for taking the tantalising opportunity of the Aston Villa job that summer, but he dug his heels in. Luton were to go again.
Put Luton into the lead inside 4 minutes.
Luton's first goal was nicely worked. Brian Steen's dummy, and then Mick Harford turned the ball back for Steen to take in his stride.
But it was never going to be a quiet season, not with Luton Town. First off, Pleat drove the club away from an impending financial crisis by wringing $750,000 out of Liverpool for Paul Walsh. Raddy Antic and Brian Horton were out, and incomings were only ratified after a boardroom overhaul and a more generous overdraft. It allowed a quartet to come through: Villa's Steve Foster, Peter Nicholas from Crystal Palace and Walsall's David Priest, before finally Mick Harford from Birmingham. But the biggest celebration was the fact Milton Keynes Borough Council had finally dropped the idea of needing a football club. Luton would not be the victims of the relocation. The season on the actual pitch started off strong. Little did anybody know that Stoke City's rolling over was something they'd do 31 whole times in the league as part of one of English football's worst ever seasons. With all the upheaval around the club, it was a wonder that Luton weren't joining them. Instead, they were in a relegation scrap a little closer to safety alongside Sunderland, Ipswich and Coventry. Still, they had an FA Cup run to shout about. Stoke undone after 2 games in the 3rd round, Huddersfield immediately in the 4th before 3 games were required to pass by Watford and into the quarter-finals. But I should remind you that this is Luton Town Football Club. Nothing was ever quiet. Their quarter-final at home against Millwall would be the thing everybody would remember from Luton this season.
Some of the travelling so-called Millwall supporters invaded the pitch, and indeed seats were broken and thrown onto the playing area. Very swift decision. He's going to take the teams on, just as the referee had to do in Millwall's last FA Cup quarter-final. Fans who had spilled over began to get onto the playing area. George Graham and Assistant Theo Foley have been in consultation with the police on the pitch. I think that's a challenge. There was a spot of trouble as well there, and overspill again on the side of the pitch. Again, and the referee is blown, and Luton Town are through to the FA Cup semi-finals for the first time in more than a quarter of a century. Steen the hero, Foster waved, but it's unfortunate in a way that the players have had to go so quickly, but absolutely right that they should. David Hutchins twists them off, because this unfortunate, ugly background, which these people have caused to spoil this 6th round tie in many ways, was something we could have done without. Say that in a week when the Chelsea crowd trouble is going to be investigated by the Football Association, there's another major inquiry needed here, and something, as we've said before, sooner or later has got to be done to try to prevent people like this spoiling the football for others.
for all the wrong reasons. The first landmark in what was a stain of a year for English football as a rare televisual experience was reserved for an afternoon of violence. Getting back to the football, Luton were edging closer to retaining their top flight status, losing only once between New Year's Day and their progression to the semi-final against Everton. All eyes were pointed towards Villa Park, not for when the Hatters sealed their survival 5 games out from the end of the season, but for Town's first FA Cup semi-final since they reached the final in '59.
Harford's there. And here's Hill. Ricky Hill! Beautifully taken! He drove one. It's there! Sheedy curls it. Mountfield's there! It's a goal!
Unfortunately, this was an Everton team that were gunning for a treble, and their resolve was far stronger than David Pleat's sides. That summer ever eventful, given that this is the world according to Luton Town, as the club sprung for an artificial surface for the price of a potentially world-class footballer. As the rest of the world balked, the club intended to pocket the proceeds from year-round rentals of their stadium. And whatever might be said of its advantages for the home side, Luton actually already had a good home record, placing themselves 8th in the prior season. Whilst that would climb to 6th for the 1985-86 campaign, they had only won 1 more point with the artificial surface than without it. The actual difference was in their away form, picking up 11 more points on the road compared to the prior season. Sadly, much of the season was lost to a television blackout as suits argued with each other over money and the masses were starved of their football. Either way, Luton ascended to a top half position, their most enjoyable day coming in October in a 7-0 thrashing over Southampton. Away from home though, fantastic victories at dangerous sides like Spurs, Watford, Southampton and surprise title challengers West Ham United. Naturally, this upturn in success was dangerous for a small club back then, just as it is now. Paul Elliott had returned from a broken leg and his form demanded a £400,000 fee from Aston Villa. Pocketing most of that, David Pleat brought in Wigan's Mike Newell for £85,000. And whilst Everton had Luton's number in the FA Cup again, this time in the quarter-final, they plotted their revenge 10 days later at Kenilworth Road, denying them in a 2-1 win. 13 days after another satisfying season was over, reality hit home. David Pleat was gone, coaxed to the capital with the promise of the Spurs manager's job.
Then found its way to Newell as a Liverpudlian chasing the Merseyside-dominated championship race.
Any fears that Luton would just die without the David Pleat effect were greatly overestimated. John Moore was promoted internally much like Pleat, and he had taken Town to the record-breaking, dizzying heights of 7th place. They didn't even need Mick Harford, who was routinely out on the treatment table. Not to worry, Mike Newell, or we've got Mick Harford at home, more than filled his void as the club whipped Liverpool not just once but twice by 3 goals, first in the league and then in the cup. Of course, that being Luton, it wasn't the whole story. They had banned away fans after the Millwall riots, and that had earned them a disqualification from the League Cup for the 86-87 campaign. Arguably the greatest thing Moore did in what turned out to be a rather fleeting 12 months at the club before his shock resignation was in the hiring of Ray Harford, no relation, as assistant manager, whilst Jim Ryan came in as coach. Naturally, the managerial pipeline at Kenilworth Road was assured well into the 90s and the Premier League age, and judging by form, Luton were well placed to be First Division furniture by the time that league came into existence.
So well, Breaker with the cross, Harford, now it falls to McDonough, yes!
Once the players got their way and their natural 4-4-2 game was allowed to return under the new manager, Luton flourished. They entered November in the bottom 5, but after sinking the likes of Newcastle, Wednesday Spurs, Watford, Charlton and on New Year's Day, Chelsea, they strode into 88 in 8th place. And not only that, they had a profitable quarter-final in the League Cup upon their return to the competition. Little old Bradford City were conquered with ease, and it left 2 legs against Oxford United, now a dangerous opponent and recent winners of the competition. Luton stood 3 games away from immortality.
Oh, Payton made an error of judgment there. This is Rob Johnson. Stein coming in. Oh, brilliant goal! With the left foot, it was. Oh, it's in!
This has gone there to watch him. Harper getting in on this one. Foster's in there too. The chance for Luton. Stein has scored. Checked by him. That's the ball of Miller. Thomas. Now Smith. The great chance now. Save. Superbly by Little. Stumble. Could Black get in there? Stein. Stein. And it's in there. The outside there. Stein. And Luton are ahead.
Not only had Oxford been sunk in the semis, they'd been smashed 7-4 in the league before one of the greatest Wembley shocks in recent memory when George Graham's Arsenal got turned over under the shadow of the Twin Towers. After 103 long years, Luton Town had won a major trophy, and via the bodies of Hartlepool, Southampton, QPR and Portsmouth, another looked on the horizon. Wimbledon appeared in the FA Cup semi-final.
First goal of the season to make it 1-1. And he takes it. Talk. Oh, yes. It's little Rose.
Sadly, thanks to the ISIL disaster, European football wasn't an option, as the Hatters ended the campaign with 4 successive 1-1 draws before going again strongly into the 88-89 campaign.
Backs away. Williams with the kick. Here's Harper. The 6th of the chest of Harper.
Ray Harford was smart enough to notice his team's advancing ages and brave enough to get rid of a talisman as notable as Brian Stein before Mark Stein, Mal Donaghy and Andy Dibble joined him in leaving. Then the splurge began. Steve Williams from Arsenal acquired for a record 300 grand, quickly following into Kenilworth Road, Roy Wegerle, John Dreyer and Alec Chamberlain. Whilst it was another slow start to the season, both Leeds and Manchester City had been dumped out of the League Cup in advance of the quarter-final, which pitted Luton Town with Southampton in January. Southampton, who had been pumped 6-1 in the league, but they were a little more difficult to dispose of in the Cup, the Hatters requiring a replay before West Ham were comparatively thrashed 5-0 across 2 legs in the semi-final. Nottingham Forest were the opponents at Wembley. Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest, but his powers were apparently on the wane and he hadn't won a trophy for nearly a decade.
So now, turning a good cross back in there again. Richards forward and Neil Webb is further forward than any other, and there's Webb! 6-yard boxes, Nigel Pearson again! It's another one!
Picking up the pieces of a Wembley defeat, Ray Harford and his team were thankful for the renewed energy of new coach Terry Mancini. The Hatters eventually avoided the drop by 2 points before the club's financial mismanagement came into focus yet again. The squad was dismantled, the stadium sold and leased back as they struggled to keep their head afloat amid the new and relentless slosh of top-flight money.